A single eye, wide with a sudden, profound realization, stared intently, a silent utterance forming. This, the man, now on his knees, clutched his head in disbelief, a thought echoing in his mind. No way. Is this reincarnation? Below, a question materialized, asking for his favorite game, to which he mentally responded, I'll answer like this, as images of a gleaming sword, a mystical orb, and an ancient tome filled his vision. The world of Dungeon Brave Soul unfolded, revealing a vibrant cast of characters, a cheerful blonde youth, a serene woman in traditional attire, and a bright-eyed girl, all standing before an ornate building under a clear sky. This was the grand beginning, a declaration that he had been reincarnated into the world of my favorite game. The fantasy of swords, magic, and a harem in another world begins. A new group of figures, including a prominent blonde-haired girl and a dark-haired young man resembling the protagonist, stood poised before a magnificent academy. Back in his own reality, the man, now dressed in a suit, returned to his apartment, sighing with exhaustion. Phew, I'm tired, he muttered, the weight of his day evident in his weary posture. He quickly settled in front of his computer, his fingers eager on the mouse. Sorry to keep you waiting. From now on, it's my time, he declared, a surge of anticipation replacing his earlier fatigue. Engrossed, he immersed himself in the world of Dungeon Brave Soul, headphones on, controller in hand, surrounded by the comforts of his room, a stark contrast to his earlier weariness. Within the game, the Grand Academy stood ready for a momentous occasion. Slayer Year 101, April 5th, Entrance Ceremony Day, a new chapter about to unfold for its students. Students gathered, exchanging greetings and nervous remarks about the entrance ceremony and exam results. Good morning. Nervous about the entrance ceremony? One asked, while another worried about the exam results. The narrator clarified that this was a sword and magic fantasy RPG, as the gamer himself exclaimed with delight. All right. Entering the 42nd round, he took a refreshing drink, reflecting on his enduring passion for the game. No matter how many times I play, I never get tired of it, he mused, acknowledging that his dedication to Dungeon Brave Soul was what allowed him to endure even his bleak workplace, a glimpse of which showed him toiling away in a mundane office. He imagined the world of Dungeon Brave Soul, where the central male student, Leon Praise, found himself surrounded by numerous female students, all vying for his attention. The game's unique appeal, he knew, lay in its ability to allow players to deepen their bonds with these heroines, potentially leading to romantic relationships. Within this vibrant game world, a teacher stood before a class, preparing to announce the top performers of the entrance exam. Leon Praise, along with other students like Nagisa Saikai, Aerith Centraka, Shell Uranus, and a serious-looking male student, awaited the results with anticipation. Back in his own reality, the protagonist, headphones on and a drink in hand, smiled broadly. He was fully immersed in the game, eagerly anticipating the next revelation about its intricate world. He continued to play, surrounded by the comforts of his room, as the game introduced him to the four main characters who would shape the core narrative. The game then detailed two of these key figures, Shell Uranus, who achieved 5th place in the entrance exam and began as a mage, and Nagisa Saikai, who secured 4th place and started as a swordsman. Following them was Aerith Centraka, who placed 3rd in the entrance exam and embarked on her journey as a cleric, her gentle smile a stark contrast to the challenges that awaited her. Finally, the game introduced Leon Praise, the undisputed class topper of the entrance exam. He was designated a spellblade and, more importantly, revealed to be a hero's descendant and the true protagonist of the story. The main story, he understood, revolved around controlling Leon, deepening his intimacy with the various heroines, and ultimately challenging the formidable Demon King. Beyond this central quest, the game boasted numerous large and small sub-events, some well-known among fans, others rumored to be undiscovered, adding significant depth to the experience. Furthermore, the game's appeal extended to its dynamic visuals. Depending on the story's progression, the heroine's outfit graphics would change, showcasing the incredibly beautiful artistry. He realized that this visual splendor, combined with another significant factor, was the biggest reason for Dungeon Brave Soul's immense sales success. The ultimate reason for its widespread popularity, he concluded, was the undeniable fact that it was rated for adults, allowing for more intimate and suggestive interactions between Leon and the heroines. He found himself captivated by the game's promise, the ability to cultivate a harem, a concept that brought a flush to his cheeks as he imagined the possibilities with the in-game protagonist, Leon Praise, and heroines like Aerith Centraka. Indeed, the game emphasized that raising intimacy with the heroines was an incredibly heart-melting experience, though he mused that the intensity might not be as profound as it seemed. Even with Leon surrounded by a multitude of beautiful women, including Shell Uranus, Nagisa Saikai, and others, the game, known as Yandere, had achieved immense success, leading to adaptations into anime, manga, and various merchandise, expanding its reach across numerous media. This widespread appeal was largely due to its masterful balance of serious RPG elements with its more erotic aspects, a combination that thrilled players and contributed heavily to its adult-rated version. Despite the game's allure, he let out a groan of frustration, rubbing his temple. He knew that the game contained everything he could ever want, even if he hadn't fully explored it all yet. He continued to play, his head in his hands, acknowledging his growing exhaustion. The in-game characters, including Fantasy Male 2 and the 2 female students, continued their narrative on the screen, oblivious to his fatigue. Finally, succumbing to the overwhelming weariness, he decided to rest, collapsing onto the floor beside his gaming setup, surrounded by the remnants of his long session. A lone figure, clad in dark, flowing attire, stands in a grand, ornate hall, a question hanging in the air. What game do you dislike? This question leads into the world of Dungeon Brave Soul 2, where a character who previously lacked even a name in the first installment, now known as Xenon, has become the main protagonist. He is seen interacting with Leon as the story unfolds after Leon had sealed the Demon King. In this second game, the player assumes the role of Xenon, navigating a world now bound by heavy chains, but the narrative takes an unexpected turn. Xenon, initially approaching Leon, quickly forms a troublesome friendship with him. He also cultivates relationships with the various heroines, gathering them to form a formidable party. However, as time progresses, the dynamics within the group begin to shift dramatically. The heroines, once close to Leon, gradually start to distance themselves from him. This unsettling change occurred because Xenon was systematically stealing the heroines away, asserting his dominance as he sat triumphantly amidst a pile of them. Cornered and helpless, Leon is forced to witness Xenon's cruelty as he reveals a heroine he has taken, tormenting her before Leon's very eyes. The heroine, her face contorted in agony and fear, cries out desperately, pleading for the torment to cease. Leon, his own face etched with profound despair and tears welling in his eyes, reaches out a trembling hand, utterly powerless to intervene. Driven to the absolute brink of despair by the unfolding tragedy, Leon makes a desperate choice. He unleashes the ancient seal of the Demon King, then turns and walks into a dark, foreboding cave, seeking a path forward through forbidden power. A blinding explosion of light erupted, signaling the catastrophic end of the world, a direct consequence of the Demon King's unleashed power. The protagonist, however, remembered the game that led to this ruin, Dungeon Brave Soul 2. It was a twisted tale of love and battle, a grotesque NTR game where the original hero, Leon, was tormented by the new protagonist, Xenon, who stole his heroines. He hated it, never wanting to experience it again. He stretched out a hand, feeling a strange, unfamiliar sensation as he slowly began to awaken. He then noticed his surroundings, a lavish room unlike his own, and a body that felt surprisingly muscular and lean. He questioned where he was and why his physique had changed so drastically. Despite the confusion, he observed the opulent details of the room, recognizing its undeniable luxury. He moved towards a large, ornate mirror, his gaze fixed on the reflection that awaited him. As he drew closer, his reflection began to materialize, revealing a face that was not his own. He stared at the unfamiliar face, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. This was not his reflection. This was a different person entirely. His mind reeled as he recognized the face in the mirror. Xenon Baskerville, the very villain he despised the most from Yandere. He screamed in horror, clutching his head. Overwhelmed by the revelation, he collapsed to his knees, despair washing over him. He had been reincarnated, not as his favorite protagonist, but as the villain he hated in his favorite game. The story of his new life, as Xenon Baskerville, had just begun. Awakening with a start, he realized the face staring back at him was that of Xenon Baskerville, a character he utterly despised. This was the world of Dungeon Brave Soul, and he, the former player, had become the very protagonist of Yandere he loathed the most. He questioned the cruel twist of fate that had reincarnated him into such a man. Overwhelmed, he decided to try and snatch a few more moments of sleep, collapsing onto the floor beside a low table laden with gaming equipment, a stark reminder of his previous life. He pondered what kind of evil deeds one must commit in a past life to be reborn as a man known for preying on women, a reputation that seemed to precede Xenon, as two female students clung to him in his memory. If reincarnation was his destiny, he would have preferred to become Leon, the true protagonist, who was always surrounded by admiring female students, a stark contrast to Xenon's unsavory image. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted when a maid entered his room without permission, startling him. She immediately began to apologize profusely for her intrusion. The maid continued to express her regret, explaining that he normally did not wake up even after she knocked, which compelled her to enter without waiting. She bowed deeply, prepared to accept any punishment for her rudeness and untidy appearance. He reacted with a gasp of utter shock and confusion as the maid remained in her deep bow, seemingly expecting some form of retribution. She reiterated her readiness, asking him to punish her as he usually did. He internally recoiled, wondering what she meant by, as usual, and if the original Xenon truly committed daily acts of violence, perhaps even whipping her. He quickly instructed her to put her clothes back on, internally cursing Xenon's despicable nature and fearing that his inaction might make him seem suspicious. The maid, surprised by his words, confirmed her understanding and promised to comply, noting that if it were truly usual, he would have to repeat the command at least 10 times. He firmly stated he would not hit her for simply putting on her clothes. Moments later, the maid, now fully dressed, thanked him for waiting. He held up a set of dark clothes, confirming they were indeed Xenon's. He observed the maid more closely, realizing she possessed a striking beauty. He wondered how such a captivating woman could have been relegated to a background role in the game. His thoughts then turned to the present, asking her what the current date was. The maid, with a finger gently pressed to her lips, responded that it was April 5th, 101 in the Slayer calendar. This confirmation solidified his understanding. He was undeniably in the world of Yandere. He reflected on the significance of April 5th, an unforgettable day for many, as it marked the entrance ceremony for the Royal Academy of Sword and Magic in the royal capital. For him, having already completed the game, It was also a date etched in memory. As he considered his next steps, the maid inquired if Zenon-sama would be skipping his morning training today. He replied that he would indeed begin attending the academy from this day forward. The maid expressed her surprise, noting that Zenon usually started his training every morning without fail. Meanwhile, the protagonist manifested a swirling vortex of dark energy in his hand, realizing that the original Zenon possessed a diligent, hard-working side and powers that were never depicted in Yandere 2. The maid then offered to prepare breakfast if he was taking a break from training. He declined, stating he would continue his training as usual, and asked her to lead him to the training grounds. As he followed the maid, he observed the surroundings, a place he recognized from the game, and questioned the nature of Zenon's training grounds. He began to practice with a sword, feeling his body gradually adapt to Zenon's physical capabilities. It felt as if he had been using this body since the moment he was born. He observed the training targets, realizing that Zenon's martial arts prowess was far beyond what mere talent could achieve. With a focused gaze, he unleashed a powerful Dark Blade attack. The Dark Blade attack struck its target with devastating force, shattering it into countless fragments. He continued to ponder Zenon's past, questioning how a man so diligent could become the villain known for stealing other men's women. He acknowledged the mastery of advanced dark magic Zenon possessed, realizing the original Zenon must have trained extensively in both swordsmanship and magic. He resolved that as long as he inhabited this body, he needed to understand everything about Zenon. A sudden realization struck him. In the first place, the reason for Zenon's bad reputation was his womanizing. However, he had not yet stolen any women, and it was currently the day of the Royal Academy's entrance ceremony. Therefore, he concluded, there was no reason to dislike him yet. His thoughts then turned to his future, declaring that now that he had become Zenon, he would avoid the scandalous developments that plagued the character in the game's sequel. He envisioned a relaxed school life, contemplating whether to support the protagonist in defeating the Demon King or simply avoid all danger. Just then, a maid approached him, offering a glass of water, to which he gratefully responded that it was a big help. Meanwhile, the maid, Leviana, peeked around a corner, her eyes wide with surprise at the unexpected interaction. He turned to her, shirtless, and asked why she had frozen. Leviana, still reeling, internally struggled to comprehend that Zenon-sama was actually thanking her. She chastised herself, calling Zenon a terrible person for making her feel such intense emotions, and urged herself to regain composure. He looked directly into her eyes, expressing his sincere gratitude for her unwavering devotion, admitting he had been too shy to voice it until now. Leviana, blushing deeply, could only manage a soft sound of surprise. Overwhelmed, she covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling in her eyes. He, meanwhile, reaffirmed his internal resolve not to become a villain like the original Zenon, deciding it was better to change his heart and actions while he still could. Leviana wept tears of pure joy, proclaiming it the best day of her life and that her devotion had finally been rewarded. He gently took her hands, telling her it was his fault for not thanking her sooner and promising to truly appreciate her from that moment forward. She, still tearful, affirmed her unwavering loyalty to her young master. Later, Zenon, now dressed in his school uniform, prepared to depart in a grand carriage. Leviana, still visibly emotional, bid him a heartfelt farewell, urging him to take care. He internally mused that her reaction had been surprisingly easy to elicit, but also reminded himself that he needed to be cautious not to become the kind of villain who would exploit such devotion. An elderly butler stood nearby, observing the scene. As the carriage began to move, Leviana continued to wave frantically, shouting for her young master to return safely without any injuries. The butler remained composed beside her, while Zenon looked out from the carriage window, a calm expression on his face. He let out a weary sigh, his mind consumed by the question of how much of the original game's scenario he should allow to unfold. From this day forward, with the entrance ceremony, the events of Yandere would truly begin. The protagonist, Leon Brave, was destined to spend 2 years at the academy, working alongside the heroines to defeat the Demon King. As he considered his role as a classmate, he pondered the extent of his involvement in the main scenario. He resolved that the heroine would not be cheated on, nor would he steal someone else's girlfriend. He valued pure love. His thoughts drifted to the darker path of the game's sequel, Yandere 2, where Leon, the hero who sealed the Demon King, would be betrayed by Zenon, who stole the heroine. This act of despair would lead the hero to resurrect the Demon King. The resurrection of the Demon King would unleash large-scale magic, devastating the royal capital and everyone within it, leading to a catastrophic bad ending. He concluded that if he simply avoided stealing the women, the tragic outcome could be averted. He would wait for Leon to defeat the Demon King, completely ignoring the game's predetermined scenario for his own character. With a determined gaze, he declared that he would not follow Zenon's original path. He had chosen a different destiny, one divergent from the game's script. A grand, ornate gate, bearing the inscription Royal Academy of Sword and Magic, stood wide open, welcoming a group of students. They gathered at the entrance, their figures small against the imposing architecture, ready to embark on their academic journey. He clenched his fists, a wide, almost manic grin spreading across his face as he declared that this was the academy, the very place where brave souls were forged. He had waited for this moment, and now it had finally arrived. With a surge of exhilaration, he proclaimed, "Let's go." The academy itself was a sprawling, magnificent complex, its domed buildings and intricate facades rising majestically under the sun. Numerous students bustled about the grounds, a vibrant tapestry of youthful energy filling the courtyards and grand staircases. As he walked through the school, a place he had mentally traversed countless times, he found himself struggling with an unexpected nervousness. He internally chastised himself, finding it pathetic to feel such apprehension, especially for someone like him. He managed to calm himself, feeling his energy levels drop slightly as the initial excitement subsided. However, his composure was short-lived. His eyes widened as he spotted Leon, the protagonist of this world, and a sudden, sharp intake of breath escaped him. He observed the scene, a sly smile playing on his lips as he recalled the game's plot. The entrance ceremony would soon be held in the auditorium, followed by a class-specific orientation. Then, the girls would invite Leon to a social gathering, where he would become closely acquainted with the heroines. His internal musings were abruptly interrupted by a sudden, intense outburst. He cried out, warning others not to be so scared, even as his own expression twisted into a look of wild desperation. His face contorted into a terrifying grin, eyes wide and pupils dilated, a stark contrast to the two female students nearby who recoiled in fear, their hands flying to their mouths in shock. He seemed oblivious to their terror, his mind consumed by his own thoughts. The two girls, still visibly shaken, acknowledged that the incident wasn't their fault, but entirely his. Meanwhile, he walked away, his back to them, realizing he needed to be more careful and try not to laugh so intensely in front of people from now on. He found himself alone in the vast auditorium, surrounded by rows of empty seats, a stark reminder of his isolation. He covered his face with his hand, a sigh escaping him as he reflected on his role. He was the villain character, Zenon Baskerville, the brutal cuckold, and despite being alone, he asserted that he was not lonely. He listened intently as the elderly butler, standing before the assembled students, declared his intention to announce the top performers of the entrance examination. The butler then proclaimed the fifth-place recipient, Shell Uranus. A young woman with a bright smile and a feather in her hair beamed with pride, acknowledging her achievement. She was the daughter of a local noble from the frontier, a mage specializing in offensive magic, and the childhood friend who had encouraged Leon, the main character, to enroll in the academy. Next, the butler announced the fourth-place winner, Nagisa Saikai. A lively and energetic character, she blushed with a thumping heart as her name was called. She hailed from a Japanese-style country, the daughter of a swordsmanship dojo master and a samurai girl. Her initial role was that of a swordsman, a speed fighter whose prowess surpassed even Leon's. The protagonist observed her, noting the darkness she carried in her heart, a key point for his future conquest. Following this, the butler declared the third-place recipient, Aerith Centria. Born of central nobility, her father a cardinal, she was a cleric whose background was deeply rooted in the church. She smiled confidently, holding a staff, as the protagonist internally acknowledged her well-proportioned features. Finally, the butler announced the Academy's runner-up, the second-place winner, Zenon Baskerville. The protagonist, Zenon, smirked, reflecting that the future where Aerith would be a pitiful victim, taken down both in body and spirit by him, was no longer possible. He continued to blush, internally lamenting that all the main heroines were so cute, yet he felt like getting involved with them, unsure of what he should do as the villain. The butler, growing impatient, called out Zenon Baskerville's name once more, his voice sharp with expectation. Zenon, startled, realized with a groan that he had missed his chance to stand up, drawing stares from the other students in the auditorium. He remained seated, his mind racing with panic as he realized the unwanted attention his second-place ranking had brought. Whispers spread among the other students, discussing the infamous Baskerville family and their rumored ties to the criminal guild and the previous king. Meanwhile, the headmaster, a distinguished elderly man, addressed the assembly, reminding everyone that despite their noble or commoner origins, all students at the Royal Sword and Magic Academy were equal, and disrespectful behavior would not be tolerated. He then realized, with a jolt, that he had missed the proper timing to stand up, further exacerbating his awkward situation. The headmaster observed him intently. Despite his internal turmoil, he decided to deliberately remain seated, believing that if he embarrassed himself carelessly, he might become a target for bullying. He offered a sarcastic apology for his rudeness, stating he would keep the headmaster's advice in mind, all while sporting a subtly villainous smirk. A heavy silence descended upon the entire assembly hall, the tension palpable as all eyes fixed on the defiant student. Meanwhile, the heroines, Shell Uranus, Nagisa Saikai, and Aerith Centria, also watched the unfolding drama with keen interest. The headmaster, his expression stern, acknowledged Zenon's apology but noted its cheeky tone, questioning if he truly had no intention of changing his rebellious attitude. Zenon, internally screaming, desperately insisted that he had apologized, and that despite his villainous appearance, he was actually a good person. The headmaster, with a slight cough, declared that since it was a celebratory occasion, he would let the matter rest for now. However, he issued a stern warning that if no improvement was seen in the future, he could not guarantee what might happen. Zenon reacted with a startled gasp. Still reeling from the reprimand and his missed timing, he wondered what he had done wrong. The headmaster then shifted his focus, announcing the first-place achiever and class president, Leon Brave. Leon Brave, born as the child of a hero, possessed the unique power to seal the Demon King, making him the one and only true protagonist. Though born a commoner, he achieved excellent grades as the top student in his class, was loved by many heroines, and was a handsome, blonde young man. His initial job was that of a rune knight, a rare class that utilized both close-range combat and magic, with only 2 such individuals appearing in the game's lore. He fixed his gaze upon Xenon, who internally questioned if the stare was one of animosity. Xenon mused that he hadn't yet committed any acts worthy of hatred, such as stealing heroines. A sudden realization then struck him. The true protagonist he had played countless times was standing directly before him. Moments later, the headmaster requested Leon to deliver the new student representative's greeting. He calmly affirmed, stepping forward to address the assembly. As Leon began his address, he humbly stated his origins as a commoner from the countryside, expressing profound honor to stand at the prestigious Royal Sword and Magic Academy. He extended his gratitude to the faculty, future mentors, and especially to his guardians and Count Uranus, who had been instrumental in his journey. Meanwhile, Xenon wondered if his earlier disruptive behavior had offended Leon, though he maintained it was unintentional. He continued, declaring his primary motivation for attending the academy was to cultivate strength and safeguard the nation. He acknowledged the Slayer's kingdom's current state of peace, yet firmly asserted that the absence of war did not equate to an absence of evil that must be opposed. Xenon, listening intently, found the speech somewhat underwhelming, having anticipated a more grandiose declaration of becoming a hero king. With a determined clench of his fist, Leon concluded his declaration, prompting murmurs among the assembled students. Xenon, caught off guard, uttered a surprised "huh." A moment of silence followed, Leon's eyes narrowing with an intense, focused expression. Then, Leon's sharp gaze unmistakably locked onto Xenon, who recoiled in shock. Xenon internally protested, questioning why Leon was displaying such hostility when he hadn't committed any villainous acts yet, feeling the unexpected targeting acutely. Xenon reflected on the game Yandere 3, where he was merely a minor character. He recalled that the protagonist of Yandere 2, NLJ, had suddenly transformed into a villain protagonist with a completely new backstory. He wondered if this forceful alteration of the game's setting was the reason Leon had begun to show hostility towards him, despite his own inaction. He continued his internal monologue, considering the dire possibility that if Leon were to be defeated by the Demon King, the entire world could face utter destruction. He concluded that there was no guarantee Leon would defeat the Demon King as originally planned, nor that the story would culminate in a happy ending. The school ceremony concluded, and students were instructed to proceed to their classrooms. Xenon sat thoughtfully, observing the bustling classroom around him. He pondered that if the scenario had indeed changed, his prior knowledge from the game might no longer be useful. He had initially planned to remain passive and simply survive, but now he realized he would need to exert his utmost effort. He resolved to avoid carelessly interfering with Leon's actions and to strive for a peaceful school life. As he continued to think, Leon, seated nearby, reacted with a frustrated grunt, feeling as though Xenon's presence implied he had done something wrong. Xenon, meanwhile, considered if there was a more reliable method to achieve his goals. He envisioned a future where he would join Leon and the others, supporting them after the Demon King's defeat. He believed that by defeating the Demon King, they could secure a safe school life without the world perishing. He acknowledged his own strength, considering himself the strongest character after the Demon King and Leon. A female teacher observed Xenon, thinking that she would ensure he remained wholesome and true to the main scenario, despite his recent actions. Xenon, for his part, wondered why he had taken such actions in the first place. Later, as the school day concluded, students discussed club activities. Leon inquired about joining a club, while others suggested a meeting. Xenon, observing the interactions, mused that human likes and dislikes are often determined by first impressions within a few seconds. He noted that his appearance, as a member of the notorious Marquis family, was widely known throughout the kingdom. He decided it was best to return home quickly and formulate a new strategy for the challenges ahead, acknowledging the unexpected turns his life had taken. Upon his arrival, a grand carriage pulled up to the imposing Baskerville mansion, and as he stepped out, a chorus of voices welcomed the young master home. Moments later, Leviana, the maid, rushed to his side, expressing concern about his whereabouts and the cold, before urgently informing him that his lord father was waiting and wished to see him in the office immediately. The mention of Grandolph Baskerville, his father, caused a flicker of apprehension to cross his face, his expression tightening. Grandolph Baskerville was known as Xenon's father, the ruler of the night in the kingdom, the very man who had set Xenon on a path of evil. He was the undisputed leader of the underworld, the administrator governing a vast crime guild, a money-hungry individual who trafficked in slaves, and a ruthless slayer who manipulated assassins, burying everything in darkness. Even from the game's lore, his unparalleled villainy was clear. Despite his desire to avoid involvement with such a figure, he knew his father was unavoidable. With a sigh, he acknowledged the pain of the situation and proceeded to the office, announcing his presence as he entered. Suddenly, without warning, dark magic chains erupted from the floor, coiling around him with immense force. The attack, known as Bloody Chain, was swift and brutal. The powerful chains quickly subdued him, forcing him to the ground, where he lay helpless. He struggled against the magical bonds, gasping in pain as a shadowy figure loomed over him, its voice cold and familiar. Fazum Tempo, Meu Filho, the figure stated, confirming his identity. Grandolph Baskerville, his father, stood over him, explaining that the dark magic, Bloody Chain, restrained and inflicted intermittent damage over time, making it a form of torture. He then casually inquired about Xenon's performance in the entrance exam, noting that he had placed second. He continued to berate Xenon, expressing profound disappointment that his son could not even achieve the top rank in a minor academy. He declared that the Baskerville family, a lineage of strong dominators of the night, would not tolerate any form of defeat, accusing Zenon of sullying their pride with his perceived foolishness. Zenon lay chained and writhing in agony, barely able to utter a sound. Still disappointed, he warned Zenon that if he failed to secure the top position in the next exam, this current punishment would be far from the end. He then instructed Zenon to diligently follow the steward's orders and not neglect his training, before departing for his own work. Moments after Grandolph's departure, Leviena rushed into the room, her eyes widening in horror at the sight of Zenon, severely injured and still bound by the bloody chain. She cried out his name, desperately trying to comfort him and promising immediate medical treatment. Leviena quickly administered a potent healing potion to Zenon, who lay bleeding and barely conscious, his body marred by the brutal attack. Later, Zenon awoke in his bed, observing the grand Baskerville mansion under the night sky. He noted with a sense of relief that the extensive damage to his body was rapidly disappearing, a testament to the potion's remarkable efficacy. He then noticed Leviena, who had fallen asleep beside him, her head resting gently on the bed, exhausted from her efforts to care for him. Zenon reflected on Leviena's unwavering kindness, questioning why such a good person would serve someone like him, a depraved bastard who steals others' lovers. He also recalled the lingering pain of his father's abuse and torture, a memory that still stung whenever he thought of it. His thoughts then turned to Grandolph Baskerville, whom he unequivocally blamed for the original Zenon's descent into madness. He believed it was Grandolph's cruelty that drove the former Zenon to lose his sanity. He realized that the original Zenon's mental breakdown was likely a direct consequence of the daily abuse and accumulating burdens he endured. This profound loss of mental balance ultimately led to the brutal act of framing Leon and abducting the heroine. Zenon further contemplated the original Zenon's intense envy of Leon, who possessed everything he lacked: the love of many heroines, the admiration of his classmates, and the celebration of adults for defeating the Demon King. Zenon, born into a notorious family and despised by other students, suffered abuse and lacked a father's love, making Leon a maddeningly envious presence, a constant reminder of what he desperately desired but could never attain. He continued to recall the original Zenon's past, remembering how he had stolen all the heroines away from Leon. Among them, Aerith Centria was seen crying, a victim of the original Zenon's selfish desires. With a determined glint in his eyes, he clenched his fist, having made a firm decision. He had set a new, resolute goal for himself in this world. His thoughts then turned to a shadowy, monstrous figure, a person who, in his mind, needed to be defeated even before the Demon King himself. This figure was Grandolph, his own father, who wore a sinister, knowing smile. Zenon declared him an irreconcilable enemy who should not exist, solidifying his goal to defeat him. He vowed to defy both the predetermined script and the father of the evil leader. Having been reborn, he would live freely and enjoy this world on his own terms. Just as his resolve hardened, Leviena, the maid, burst into his room, startled to find him awake. She called out to him, her face flushed with surprise and relief. She immediately threw herself onto him, embracing him tightly, her face buried in his chest as she muttered his name. He, in turn, was flustered by her sudden, overwhelming affection. Leviena cried out his title in surprise, still clinging to him, while he remained visibly flustered. The scene then shifted, revealing the grand, imposing Baskerville estate under a vast, starry night sky. Later, Zenon sat alone at a small table in a richly appointed room, diligently writing in a notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. His immediate task was to confirm all his existing knowledge of this world, meticulously detailing quests and locations within his notebook, preparing for the path ahead. He meticulously documented his knowledge, outlining the unfolding scenario and the crucial information he needed to acquire. He decided to record his thoughts in Japanese, ensuring clarity and ease of access for himself. With his initial notes complete, he reflected on the next phase, how to truly live in this world. He felt a sense of accomplishment, believing his preparations were sufficient for now. He knew that to achieve his goals, the one he must defeat was his father, Grandolph. The man's sinister smirk seemed to mock him even in his thoughts, a constant reminder of the formidable obstacle ahead. As he continued to plan, he considered the implications of deviating from the established scenario. Such a change would make Leon's actions unpredictable, complicating everything. He also pondered the possibility of simply leaving the house, but quickly dismissed the idea, realizing that the world was filled with dangers like gangsters and assassins, making escape impossible. His expression hardened as he confronted a stark reality. If Leon, the hero, were to fall to the Demon King, the entire world would perish. He mused that it would be ideal if the Demon King could be sealed away, but the weight of the world's fate rested heavily upon his shoulders. He visualized the core dynamics of the world he inhabited: Leon, the destined hero, surrounded by heroines, forming unbreakable bonds. He understood that Leon was the central figure, attracting all the heroines, while his own original role, as the MC or protagonist, was to be left behind, crying and alone, a stark contrast to the hero's popularity. Lying in bed, the protagonist pondered his current state, realizing that to truly grow stronger, he would need to acquire new skills and develop existing ones. He then activated his status screen, a holographic display materializing before him, confirming his identity as Zenon Baskerville and his current job as a magic swordsman, with a swordsmanship proficiency of 20. He noted that his current job mirrored his role in the game, a magic swordsman, much like Leon. He also understood that this world operated without traditional levels. Instead, growth was achieved by increasing skill proficiency. As he delved deeper, he saw his swordsmanship at 20, dark magic also at 20, and surprisingly, training also at 20. He murmured in confusion at these unexpected values. He understood why swordsmanship and dark magic shared the same proficiency, but the increase in training puzzled him. He hoped he would not have to rely on dark magic, questioning how its proficiency had risen. He quickly discerned that this status screen differed significantly from the game's interface, notably lacking commands for items, settings, save, or load, indicating a more direct and less manipulable reality. He concluded that he needed to acquire items and learn new skills to increase his proficiency. He noted that the maximum value for combat skills was still 0, suggesting immense potential for growth. Furthermore, he realized that raising certain skills to a specific level would unlock paths to advance from his initial class to higher ones. His thoughts turned to the importance of equipment. Strong weapons and armor could boost ability values, while specific items granted new skills and magic. He also considered accessories and damage-reducing talismans, all of which he was determined to secure. He then considered the various methods for obtaining these crucial items. They could be purchased at stores, found by delving into dangerous dungeons, or earned as rewards for completing specific events. He considered the various methods of acquiring items. Those found in dungeons were random and unreliable, while rare items could only be obtained through auctions, demanding a substantial fortune. He had no intention of adhering strictly to the established scenario, but he knew he must avoid hindering Leon's progress, as that would undoubtedly lead to a disastrous outcome. He questioned whether event-specific items should always be given to Leon, fearing the consequences if he were to foolishly claim something that ultimately led to Leon's defeat by the Demon King. A soft knocking echoed through the opulent room, followed by a polite inquiry, asking if they might enter. Moments later, Leviana, the maid, entered with a tray laden with breakfast. She explained that she had brought it to him directly, concerned he might be feeling unwell. He expressed relief, admitting he was indeed growing hungry, and noted the restorative properties of the coffee, sandwich, and soup. He thanked her for the meal, causing her to blush profusely as she insisted she had done nothing deserving of his gratitude, merely fulfilling her duties as a maid. He reiterated his thanks, acknowledging her consistent care. As he calmly sipped his coffee, Leviana became utterly overwhelmed, covering her face with her hand as a soft sound of distress escaped her. She quickly apologized and hurried out of the room, promising to return later for the plates. As she departed, he noticed several drops of blood splattering onto the floor where she had just stood. He could hardly believe it. She had become so excited by his simple thanks that she had suffered a nosebleed. He found her intense adoration both frightening and, to his surprise, something he truly cherished. Later, dressed in his school uniform, he walked through the grand halls, reflecting that he now possessed proper allies and had no need to resort to desperate measures. As he continued, the old butler, Zalus, approached him, offering a respectful greeting. He immediately questioned if Zalus intended to report his perceived laziness to his father. Zalus, however, explained his concern stemmed from Zenon's absence from his morning practice in the garden, and he had merely been checking on his well-being, reminding him of his responsibilities as the head butler entrusted with the estate's management. He stood before the old butler, who conveyed Lord Baskerville's high expectations for Zenon to grow into a strong individual worthy of the family name, sincerely hoping he would not betray those hopes. Zenon assured him that he would meet his father's expectations, acknowledging that there would be times he took a break from training, but there was no need for concern. The butler looked down, and Zenon turned his head slightly, a subtle humph escaping him. With a determined glint in his eye, he declared that merely practicing swings was not the sole path to strength, and he intended to become strong enough to surprise his father in his own unique way. As he prepared to depart, the butler inquired if he had any specific plans to achieve greater power. A week later, Zenon found himself at the academy, his presence exuding a menacing aura that drew whispers from his fellow students. Leon, too, regarded him with undisguised hostility. Zenon, however, remained unfazed, reflecting that middle school studies posed no challenge, and the use of magic felt instinctively ingrained in his very being, coming to his mind with effortless ease. As he sat in class, a sense of anticipation grew within him for the lesson he had eagerly awaited. The female teacher then announced that today's subject would be dungeon exploration. Zenon offered a subtle, knowing smile, while some of his classmates reacted with visible fear. The teacher instructed the students to form parties before venturing out. Zenon listened intently as the nature of dungeons was explained. They were lairs teeming with countless monsters, mountains of treasure that produced infinite resources. However, if left unattended, these dungeons became ticking time bombs, endlessly spewing forth more monsters, though both creatures and treasures occurred naturally within them. The academy itself had been established with the explicit goal of exterminating the monsters inhabiting these dungeons, thereby developing human resources to protect the lives of the populace. A grand, ornate door, overgrown with vines, stood as a testament to this mission, likely marking the entrance to one such perilous realm. Standing before the imposing entrance, the teacher announced that each party would now enter the dungeon in turn. This particular dungeon, known as Sage's Playground, was the tutorial dungeon owned by the academy. Zenon, now equipped with a sword, prepared himself. He stood confidently, asserting that he was perfectly capable of navigating the tutorial dungeon on his own and had no need for a party. The female teacher, however, looked on with a worried expression, wondering if his solo venture was truly acceptable, a sharp sting in her nose betraying her concern. Zenon glanced back, reiterating his stance that he had no problems proceeding alone. Nagisa Saikai, a student known for her initial distrust of others and reluctance to interact, stood near the dungeon entrance. The chronicler noted that her future story would involve being helped by Leon and opening her heart. Meanwhile, the teacher expressed concern, warning that exploring a dungeon solo was dangerous, especially for a first-timer. Despite the teacher's warning, Zenon dismissed the idea of teaming up, stating it was unnecessary. Nagisa, for her part, reflected internally that she wished to keep contact with the main hero, Leon, to a minimum. The teacher, sighing, reiterated the Academy's policy. In the unlikely event of a student's death, the Academy would take no responsibility. She urged them not to act recklessly, emphasizing that while the dungeon contained no particularly dangerous monsters, any incident was the student's own responsibility. She continued, reminding the eager students that their performance within the dungeon would be reflected in their grades, as parties began to clamor for entry. As she spoke, the students erupted in a competitive frenzy, shouting over each other about whose turn it was and who would be the first to enter. The commotion continued, with students clamoring to go first, while Zenon observed the scene, noting to himself how eager everyone seemed to get into the dungeon, almost as if the teacher would decide the order. He remarked to Nagisa how carefree and reckless the other students seemed, behaving as if entering a dungeon were merely an outing. Nagisa then approached him, asking what business he had, noting he seemed to be the only one with nothing to do. She then turned to the chaotic group, declaring that if no one could decide who would go first, she, Nagisa Saikai, would take the lead, prompting Zenon to wonder if she was trying to outdo him. With a determined stride, she moved forward, asserting her intention to lead. Zenon, observing her bold move, commented on her surprisingly good personality, while other students protested, calling her actions unfair. She moved with purpose, her figure already a distant silhouette as she ventured deeper into the tutorial dungeon's dark, stone-lined corridor. Other students lingered at the entrance, watching her departure. Meanwhile, the remaining students continued their chaotic bickering, some complaining about Nagisa's selfishness, others about the unfairness of the situation. Zenon, observing their indecision, finally erupted in frustration, declaring that their inability to decide anything was a waste of time and that the sun was already setting. He demanded they make a decision, whether by rock, paper, scissors, or a lottery. Following his outburst, Leon, with a cheerful wave, announced that it was their turn and they would be off. The teacher, who had been observing, approached Zenon, expressing her surprise at his unexpected leadership skills and newfound respect for him. She then questioned him, asking if he was reconsidering his decision, implying he knew nothing. She continued, acknowledging that as a teacher, she needed to reflect deeply on the situation. It seemed the students were keeping their distance from him due to his looks and family background, and she admitted that she herself had been the same. He then turned to her, stating that regarding the order of entry, he wished to confirm one thing. She responded, noting that he hadn't participated in the rock, paper, scissors game either, and asked if it was truly acceptable for him to be the last to enter. As they spoke, Zenon's thoughts drifted to the dungeon's interior, picturing a treasure chest and a gleaming sword. He pondered whether items and treasures acquired in this dungeon would also be subject to a certain tax. The teacher clarified that this dungeon was merely part of a lesson managed by the school, and therefore no taxes would be imposed on any items found. However, she warned that the items obtainable here were worth only a pittance, even if sold. She added that there were no strong monsters, so casualties were almost non-existent. Zenon, relieved, declared he would do his best to search for items. She then advised him, since he was not in a party, to not hesitate to turn back if it became dangerous. He acknowledged her concern, stating he appreciated it, even from a teacher he believed was disliked. He internally mused that he considered her a reliable and good teacher. Yet, a dark, disturbing thought flashed through his mind. In the game, she was the woman who got disciplined in a basement and turned into a dog. He clenched his fist, his resolve hardening. He would never let that fate, the one from Damburay 2, happen. With a sinister smile, Zenon declared it was time to conquer the dungeon. He stepped into the dark corridor, his back to the entrance, ready to face whatever awaited him within. The young man, with a fierce determination, unleashed a flurry of swift, precise strikes, his blade a dark blur as he activated his Shadow Edge ability. The amorphous, bouncing slime creature shattered under his assault. He continued his relentless advance, his sword swinging in wide, powerful arcs, cleaving through the resilient, gelatinous forms that filled the dungeon corridor. After dispatching a group of the creatures, he paused, his sharp eyes narrowing as he examined a small, crystalline object that had dropped from one of them. He realized the dungeon's structure and the items it yielded were eerily identical to the game he knew so well. His thoughts drifted to the nature of this place. He understood that because it was merely a tutorial dungeon, it contained only weak monsters and no complex traps, making it easy to navigate alone. With renewed vigor, he plunged back into the fray, his sword a whirlwind of motion, effortlessly slicing through the incoming waves of slimes. He efficiently collected the dropped items, a routine task that required little effort. Yet, a deeper concern lingered in his mind. The true challenge, the monster on the bottom floor, awaited him. Dismissing the current adversaries as mere small fries, he launched himself into the air, his blade flashing as he decimated more of the bouncing, gelatinous creatures. He knew their numbers mattered little against his skill. He continued his aerial assault, a confident smirk playing on his lips as he declared the slimes nothing more than mere punching bags for his training. As he landed, a final slime burst against him, splattering its viscous contents across his face. But his smirk remained, a testament to his unwavering confidence and enjoyment of the fight. He continued his descent into the dungeon, a faint, ethereal trail of energy following his path down the stone steps. He mused that it was time to proceed to the next floor. His expression hardened, a slight frown creasing his brow as he arrived on the second floor. Upon reaching the second floor, he observed a small group of his classmates. One young man, Leon, lay injured, his face grimacing in pain, while Shell and Nagisa tried to assist him. Leon lamented his weakness, admitting his pathetic state against even minor foes in his first dungeon, but resigned himself to the situation. He pressed onward, leaving the injured behind, and stepped into a vast, cavernous chamber. The ground was littered with the defeated forms of numerous slime creatures, their lifeless bodies scattered across the floor as he swung his sword, clearing his path. As he continued his journey, he noted the increasing number of casualties on the third floor. He recognized Leon, Shell, and Nagisa among the injured students resting against the dungeon walls, realizing they were the only ones who had managed to reach this deeper layer. The group of students, including Leon, Shell, and Nagisa, sat exhausted and injured against the rough stone wall, their faces reflecting the toll of the dungeon's challenges. Shell, attempting to heal Leon, expressed her concern that if they were to cooperate later, they should consider their actions outside of school. He watched her, his thoughts turning to the concept of a cheat skill class, and internally scoffed at the idea of teaming up with brainless idiots who would only drag him down. Suddenly, a new figure appeared, a woman with long blonde hair, Aerith, who effortlessly cast powerful healing magic. Her touch brought immediate relief, and the injured students, including Leon, Shell, and Nagisa, expressed their profound gratitude, marveling at her seemingly endless mana reserves. He stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and a hint of something else, as Aerith continued her healing, her presence radiating a serene power. He quickly snapped himself out of his daze, delivering a sharp slap to his own face. He declared that such distractions were something he would fall for, and internally resolved to move forward, asserting that it would be a bad ending for Demon King's resurrection if he became an NTR protagonist. With that, he turned his back on Aerith and the group, urging himself to proceed. He, having chosen to distance himself from his classmates, was soon approached by a familiar figure. The young woman, Aerith, inquired if he was indeed Baskerville-sama. As other students looked on nervously, Aerith confirmed her own identity as junior student Baskerville-sama. In turn, he revealed himself to be Kantri-san, the academy's third-place student. He then questioned her presence and activities within the tutorial dungeon. She, with a gentle expression, offered him healing, though her tone suggested she anticipated his refusal. She explained her unwavering commitment, stating that she was someone who could not abandon the injured and was dedicated to healing everyone. Aerith Baskerville-sama was, as the chronicler knew, an incarnation of dedication and self-sacrifice, a figure who, in the game's history, often risked her life to aid those in distress. The protagonist, observing her, pressed her on her decision to remain, but she calmly stated she had received permission from her friends to prioritize the healing of the party. He internally dismissed her as overly buddy-buddy and naive. Her admirable, self-sacrificing behavior, however, simultaneously stirred a deep sense of anxiety within him, a feeling he recalled from the game's narrative. He pondered the nature of individuals who would sacrifice themselves to help others, and who would willingly give up their own happiness for the sake of others. While acknowledging she was not a bad person, he found her actions profoundly annoying. Turning his back, he began to walk away, deeming her self-sacrificing nature absurd. He decided it was not his place to reprimand her, choosing instead to leave such a task to the hero. She called out to him, asking if something was amiss. He simply advised her to continue helping others, but to do so in moderation, before continuing his solitary descent. He internally reaffirmed his conviction. It was not his destiny to save Aerith, the wounded saint, from her cycle of self-sacrifice. That, he knew, was Leon's job. He saw himself as a villain, not a hero, and intended to make his exit from this stage with a flourish, leaving the heroic deeds to others. He descended deeper into the dungeon, the path narrowing into a long, winding staircase that plunged into the darkness below. Meanwhile, on the fourth floor, a pack of horned beasts, followed by shadowy figures, charged forward with menacing intent. He continued his solitary journey, reflecting that Leon, Shell, and Nagisa had most likely already reached the lowest floor. He mused that, as expected, none of his other classmates had managed to get this far. He recalled a powerful, draconic monster, a foe that Leon had likely already defeated, a testament to the hero's strength. As he arrived in a new, cavernous area filled with small, blob-like creatures, he felt a pang of dissatisfaction. He wondered if this was truly his first dungeon experience, raising his sword in preparation. Suddenly, a terribly nervous voice cried out, followed by the sound of crumbling rock. He heard a desperate plea to retreat, a warning that death awaited if they didn't move, and he instinctively rushed towards the collapsing wall. He arrived to a scene of chaos, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized two of his classmates, a male student, injured and struggling, and a female student, desperately trying to defend them both. Towering over them was a monstrous gargoyle, a creature that, according to his knowledge, should only appear on the lowest floor of the dungeon. The injured male student cried out in anguish, demanding to know how the gargoyle dared to treat Alicia in such a way, while the gargoyle itself roared, proclaiming its intent to kill humans. He observed the unfolding disaster, recalling that Leon, Seal, and Nagisa were supposed to fight this very gargoyle on the lowest floor, with Leon awakening his heroic blood to drive it back. A sudden realization struck him. His initial assumption was wrong. He had forgotten a crucial detail. The gargoyle had indeed run away from somewhere, a fact briefly mentioned in the game's lore, and it was killing several classmates while fleeing through the upper floors. A sudden vision of his classmates, Leon, Seal, and Alicia, flashed through his mind, their faces etched with surprise and concern. The vision intensified, showing Leon cradling a dying classmate, his voice filled with anguish as he blamed himself for the enemy's escape and the resulting death. As Leon grieved, another figure, a dark-haired man, loomed over them, declaring that mob characters were compelled to die, and that Leon, too, would be killed. The scene shifted to a monstrous demon attacking Leon, its massive form dominating the cavern. The dark-haired man, observing from a distance, mused that Leon's suffering and death were necessary for his growth and to foster his hatred for the demon race. As the vision continued, the protagonist considered the implications of interfering, realizing that extending his hand might alter the future where Leon ultimately defeated the Demon King and saved the world. It was a sad truth, but he felt he had no choice but to ignore the unfolding tragedy. Yet, within the vision, as the dark-haired man turned to leave, Leon's desperate plea echoed, urging him to run away, insisting that it was over for him. The dark-haired man's fist clenched, a flicker of internal conflict crossing his face. Suddenly, the vision shattered, returning to the present. The gargoyle unleashed a devastating blast of energy, sending Leon and Seal reeling, convinced their end was near. But then, a figure stepped forward, deflecting the attack. It was the protagonist, standing resolute against the roaring gargoyle. He declared, with a renewed sense of purpose, that being a villain simply did not suit him, preparing to engage the monster. A figure, identified as Baskerville, stood defiantly before a monstrous demon. He declared that a true hero would not abandon their classmates, nor would they be unable to grow stronger in a dire situation. The demon, enraged by his presence, roared a challenge, warning him not to think he would escape unscathed. Meanwhile, a mysterious woman observed the unfolding confrontation from a distance. Baskerville merely laughed at the demon's threat, mocking it as a mere tutorial boss with no right to bark, before launching himself into a fierce attack. He soared through the air, his confidence unwavering, proclaiming himself a truly great villain that even the protagonist could not defeat. He then challenged the demon, questioning if a mere mob monster could truly stand in his way, and demanded it die for him. His assault continued relentlessly, striking the demon with powerful blows that sent debris flying. The creature roared in agony, but despite the ferocity of the attack, Baskerville noted its surprising resilience, acknowledging its toughness. Still engaged in combat, he expressed his annoyance, realizing that the gargoyle possessed the strength of monsters typically encountered in the mid-game, calling it a stiff wooden doll. He attempted to employ an ability called Shadow Edge, but his rusty starting sword proved ineffective, unable to land a single decisive blow. The demon continued to roar, seemingly unfazed by the weak attacks. As the demon flew, he observed its high physical stats, but noted its low magic resistance. This presented a new strategy, but he pondered how many magic attacks would be necessary to defeat such a formidable foe, his face now showing signs of strain and injury. The demon lunged, roaring its intent to kill. He acknowledged that such an enemy was truly meant to be defeated by a party, but lamented his situation as a solo player. With renewed determination, he resolved to finish the battle with a single critical hit. He realized he knew the demon's weakness, preparing to exploit it. He found the critical weakness. With a powerful strike, he pierced the gargoyle, eliciting a pained roar as he declared, "It's this place." The world's mechanics dictated that all enemy characters possessed specific weak points. For a gargoyle, this crucial vulnerability lay directly beneath its chin, and striking it would always result in a critical hit. As the gargoyle reeled from the blow, he mocked it, asking how humiliating it must be for an event boss to be defeated by a lesser opponent, especially after constantly failing in revenge against the hero. The gargoyle could only utter a guttural sound, acknowledging the human's presence. Suddenly, the gargoyle let out a surprised cry and unleashed a devastating hell flare in a desperate counterattack. Despite the powerful attack, the gargoyle's form began to shatter, its body erupting in a final, agonizing shriek as it was utterly destroyed. With the gargoyle vanquished, he reflected on his chosen path, knowing that the magic swordsman was the strongest starting job in this world, a path he shared with Leon. He affirmed that there was no way he could lose to a weak event boss like this. He then collected the remnants of a defeated monster, acknowledging that this was the first time he had truly fought properly since arriving in this world, claiming it as his victory. He mused on the unknown effects of defeating the event monster on the story, but decided to celebrate saving a life that was destined to die in the game's original narrative. His attention then shifted to a group of figures in the distance. Approaching the group, he saw character underscore E, attending to character underscore F, who lay injured on the ground. He called out, asking if they were alright. Character underscore E, looking up, confirmed they were alright, expressing gratitude to Baskerville for saving them in their dire situation. As character underscore E spoke, he gestured towards several empty potion bottles scattered on the ground, noting with concern that they were running low on healing potions. He looked up, startled, as Baskerville extended a hand, offering healing items. Baskerville reminded him that they were needed, implying their critical situation. Accepting the potions, he immediately administered one to Alicia, who lay injured. Baskerville reassured him that the items were inexpensive and not to worry about it. Soon, Alicia stirred, her condition visibly improving, much to his relief. With Alicia now stable, he bowed deeply to Baskerville, expressing immense gratitude not only for the healing drugs, but also for defeating the monstrous gargoyle. Baskerville, however, simply dismissed his thanks, stating that they were classmates. As he reflected on the recent battle, a sense of shame washed over him. He had never anticipated such a powerful monster appearing in this dungeon and regretted letting his guard down. His self-reproach intensified, his knuckles whitening as he clenched his fists. He believed that if only he had been stronger, his friends would not have died, and they wouldn't have faced such a horrific event. Baskerville observed him, noting his intense self-blame. Baskerville then advised him that if he truly felt responsible, he should strive to become stronger to protect his friends in the future. Internally, Baskerville mused that this individual possessed an unusually strong sense of responsibility, perhaps too much for a mere background character. He absorbed Baskerville's words, realizing the truth in them. He resolved to become stronger, just like Baskerville. Baskerville, however, humbly suggested that while he didn't need to be seen as an example, simply doing his best in academy life was enough. He then turned to Baskerville, explaining that he had misunderstood him and wished to properly apologize. Baskerville acknowledged that he had already heard about his annoyance, but accepted the apology. He confessed that he had initially thought Baskerville was a terrible person, citing his intimidating expression and the Baskerville family's poor reputation. Yet, he now realized that Baskerville had turned out to be a good guy. Baskerville simply responded with a knowing, "Yeah, I know that." His thoughts drifted to Baskerville's selfless actions, how he could have abandoned them, but instead risked danger to save them, even sharing his precious healing potions. He remembered how he and others had ignored Baskerville in the classroom. Overwhelmed by remorse, he bowed deeply once more, admitting he was truly wrong and pleading for forgiveness. He reflected on his past judgments, realizing that he had misjudged Baskerville, whose face, though often perceived as scary, concealed a true character. He felt a wave of embarrassment at his previous thoughts, especially since this was the first time he had truly spoken to a classmate since becoming a loner. As he stood there, Protagonist_1 cleared his throat, then offered him something small, saying, "Here." As he considered this, Protagonist_1 presented him with a small, ornate censer, explaining that it contained monster-repelling magic incense. He instructed Character_E to use it and take his time, making his way out of the dungeon. Protagonist_1 then clarified that the incense would only be effective against weaker enemies, like those typically found in this particular dungeon. Character_3, looking genuinely grateful, promised that he would definitely repay this favor, acknowledging how many times he had already been indebted to Protagonist_1. Protagonist_1 simply smiled, giving a thumbs up, and told him that repayment could wait until he succeeded. With a casual "see ya," he sent Character_3 on his way, while above them, shadowy, wolf-like monsters lurked, their forms crackling with energy. The path led deeper into the dungeon, eventually reaching what was known as the Playground of the Wise, the lowest floor. Meanwhile, deep within the dungeon, the rest of the group stood wary, when suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows of a doorway. Character_A, startled, exclaimed, "Baskerville?" Protagonist_1, looking somewhat disheveled but otherwise unharmed, inquired if they were all okay. Character_G, observing him, remarked that such resilience was to be expected from the descendant of a hero. Character_A, still reeling from the surprise, demanded to know if Protagonist_1 was responsible for their current situation and how he had known they were in danger. Protagonist_1, shrugging dismissively, stated he didn't understand what they were angry about. He simply assumed they had encountered the powerful monster he had faced earlier. After all, overwhelmed by the recent attack, Leon buried his face in his hands, consumed by guilt. Nagisa approached him, expressing surprise that he had emerged unharmed from the monster's assault, calling it a miracle. Leon confirmed his safety but lamented the injured classmates, realizing his failure to prevent their harm. As Leon continued to despair, Seal embraced him, tears streaming down her face. She insisted it was not his fault, explaining that without his protection, both she and Nagisa would have surely perished. His anguish only deepened as he cried out, believing that if only he had properly defeated the monster, their classmates would have been spared. He clenched his fist, declaring himself utterly powerless. A bitter thought then crossed his mind, questioning how he, a supposed descendant of a hero, could be so weak. Alicia watched him with a somber expression, while Nagisa, still nearby, muttered a frustrated "damn it." Leon remained hunched over, his despair evident, as G, observing from a distance, simply uttered his name, Leon. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the protagonist stood in contemplation, his hand resting on his chin, a thoughtful expression on his face, as if pondering the unfolding events. Back with the group, Leon, Alicia, and Seal knelt together, their faces etched with distress. It was a moment of profound regret for Leon, a pivotal point that, in the original course of events, would have spurred dramatic growth. The chronicler noted that in that original timeline, the enemy Leon had allowed to escape ultimately led to the death of a classmate. The protagonist stood alone in a grand, empty hall, gazing upwards. The chronicler pondered the implications of the altered timeline. With the changes already made, could the same crucial growth still be expected from Leon as in the original scenario? What path would the protagonist now choose in this new reality? Leon, battered and bleeding, slammed his fist into the ground, his face contorted in a grimace of self-loathing. He cursed his own weakness, unable to forgive himself for his current state. As he knelt, injured, Alicia reminded him that despite their wounds, he had still saved them. Nagisa, kneeling beside him, urged him not to blame himself, emphasizing that if not for him, she and their other classmates would have suffered far worse. The protagonist observed the scene with a serious expression. The protagonist, still observing, pondered Leon's future. He acknowledged that it was impossible to guess how Leon would grow from this point, and that he simply needed to focus on what he could definitively do in the present. Moments later, the protagonist turned to Leon, asking if he still needed anything. He then declared it was time for him to leave, advising Leon to be careful on his way back. He stated his need to hurry ahead, urging Leon to speak quickly if he had anything more to say. Leon, looking distressed, simply offered a quiet, heartfelt thank you. Leon then bowed deeply, expressing gratitude for the protagonist cleaning up his mess and for providing medicine to the injured classmates. The protagonist looked on, surprised by this unexpected display of humility from someone who had previously been so hostile. Leon, his cheeks flushed, then added a caveat, telling the protagonist not to misunderstand his thanks. The protagonist internally acknowledged that, as expected, Leon would follow the path he was destined to follow. He stormed away, his voice laced with venom, declaring he would never forgive an evildoer like the protagonist, and that he would eventually receive his just deserts. The protagonist, however, called out to him, urging him to wait. His surprise was evident as a new figure, a young woman with long, dark hair and a katana at her hip, approached him. She looked at him intently, asking if he was the one who had defeated the gargoyle. He responded with a slight smirk, neither confirming nor denying directly, but rather questioning her. So what if it was me? She smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes, stating that her perception had not failed her. She explained that, as expected, his aura was completely different from anyone else in the entire class. She then proposed a spar, believing that one could only grow stronger by fighting formidable opponents. The protagonist, however, grimaced internally, realizing that troublesome individuals now had him on their radar, anticipating tough times ahead as she walked away. Deeper within the dungeon, a grand, ornate throne sat upon a raised platform, bathed in a soft, ethereal glow, signifying the heart of the cleared chamber. He stood before the ornate throne, discovering a small box filled with coins and, more importantly, a distinctive medal. He held the medal aloft, acknowledging that he had successfully cleared the dungeon and completed the mission, remarkably, almost entirely uninjured. He examined the medal, realizing that while the gargoyle had been a tough challenge, simply driving it off wouldn't suffice. Leaving without picking up the medal would mean the floor wouldn't count as cleared, a classic mistake for a yandere player. His thoughts then drifted to Leon and the others, wondering if they had remembered to grab their own medals. He mused that he wouldn't be surprised if they had forgotten, offering his condolences if that were the case, before considering his next move. He began to move forward, his hand tracing the rough stone wall as he searched for a path, the sounds of dripping water echoing in the confined space. A vast chamber lay before him, filled to the brim with glittering gold coins, an assortment of weapons, armor, and various other treasures, all piled high against the stone walls. He found himself amidst the immense pile of riches, coins spilling from his hands as he exclaimed that this was the legendary room of the nouveau riche. He mused that such a room normally shouldn't appear until a dungeon had been cleared at least twice. The room stretched out, revealing even more piles of gold and valuable items, including chests, shields, and various magical artifacts, all sparkling under an unseen light, promising untold wealth. Among the treasures, a small, elegant black bag with intricate designs caught his eye. He recognized it as a magic bag, a truly valuable find that could hold countless items. This particular magic bag was a key item, a valuable category item that allowed for the infinite storage of gold and items from previous dungeon clears, a truly indispensable tool for any adventurer. Overjoyed, he leaped into the air, clutching the magic bag, laughing triumphantly. He realized that with so much gold and so many items, he was suddenly a billionaire, his fortune secured. With renewed vigor, he declared it was time to loot everything, and began to frantically gather the scattered items, including potions, staves, swords, and gems, into his new magic bag, eager to claim his bounty. Suddenly, a sharp pain seized him, and he clutched his chest, his eyes wide with surprise and alarm. Dark, jagged cracks began to spread across the very fabric of reality around him, a terrifying distortion. He looked on, bewildered, as the cracks intensified, and from the shimmering void, a magnificent sword, radiating a powerful aura, began to emerge from the pile of treasure. It was the demon blade, Heavenly Feather Cutter. The sword, curved like a Japanese katana with crimson veins running through its blade, was the very weapon he had used in his previous world. He had spent countless hours strengthening it, gathering materials, and commissioning blacksmiths, making it surpass even the ultimate weapon, Holy Sword Excalibur, from the latter half of the story. He realized with a profound sense of wonder that his beloved sword had also come to this world. He stared at the demon blade, Heavenly Feather Cutter, its power radiating intensely. He knew that if one's skills were maximized, this blade could inflict massive damage even upon the Demon King in hard mode. The sudden appearance of his personal sword here could only mean one thing. This realization led him to consider the vast treasure room around him, filled with countless items. He wondered if this entire chamber was stocked with items directly from his save data. He pondered the implications, his brow furrowed in deep thought. The very existence of these items, derived from his save data from the game Yandere he once played, suggested a profound connection. The thought echoed in his mind, a single, pressing question. Who in this world had orchestrated such an impossible feat? Standing amidst the glittering horde, he realized he hadn't simply ended up in this world, nor had he inhabited Xenon's body of his own volition. This could only mean someone had intentionally willed his reincarnation into this specific world. He continued to question the circumstances, wondering why he had been reincarnated as a side character like Xenon, and not the main character, Leon. Such a precise reincarnation could not be a coincidence. There had to be some deeper meaning behind it. He had no idea if a god or a devil was behind this, but he desperately sought to understand their goal in sending him to this world, and how they had managed to bring his save data along. As he emerged from the dungeon, his thoughts still swirling with these profound questions, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Aerith, the sage, who had been waiting for him. She extended her hand, tossing a small, gleaming object towards him. "Catch," she instructed, as he instinctively reached out to receive it. He recognized it immediately, a dungeon-clear medal. As he caught the medal, Aerith clapped her hands together, a gentle smile on her face. She formally acknowledged him, stating, "Xenon Baskerville-Kuhn, I hereby acknowledge that you have cleared the sage's playground." Behind her, Leon, Seal, Nagisa, and the others watched, some with surprise, others with curiosity, at the unexpected declaration. He reflected on the recent dungeon clear, noting that Leon and the others seemed unaware of the medal, leading him to question if the entire event, including the gargoyle's appearance, had been a test. Aerith, the sage, then formally permitted him to explore other dungeons, acknowledging his efforts in defeating the boss, but cautioned him not to overexert himself despite the unexpected appearance of the gargoyle. As he walked through the city streets, his thoughts turned to the equipment and items he had collected from the room of the nouveau riche. He realized he could not equip most of them without first raising his skill proficiency, and the limitations of adventuring solo became increasingly clear, prompting him to consider the necessity of finding companions. He continued to ponder his situation, acknowledging that high-level dungeons imposed a strict limit on solo exploration. He understood the need to raise his skill proficiency, but dismissed the idea of having left himself weaker weapons, seeing no practical benefit in such a choice. He further considered the dire consequences of abnormal situations, such as paralysis or petrification, which would be fatal without a companion capable of purification. While poison could be mitigated with medicine, he concluded that companions were undeniably essential. Despite this logical conclusion, he let out a frustrated sigh, lamenting his solitary nature. His mind then raced through potential options for companionship. He lacked capable allies like Leon and his group, and his other classmates were equally unsuitable. This left him with only two choices: untrustworthy mercenaries, who might abandon him or steal his loot, or slaves, who could be legally owned in the Slayer Kingdom and bound by enslavement magic to ensure semi-permanent loyalty. He wrestled with the moral implications of purchasing slaves, a concept that deeply troubled him as someone from a more wholesome background. Yet, with his very life at stake, he reluctantly admitted that he had no other viable choice. A stark realization dawned upon him. There were no second chances in this world. With this profound understanding, he resolved that quitting was not an option. He had to survive, and if that meant acquiring faithful subordinates through the ownership of slaves, then he would do what was necessary, even if it meant sacrificing his personal ideals. The path ahead led to a grand slave auction, a place where greed and desire intertwined beneath towering, ornate tents, beckoning those who sought to acquire or be acquired. A distinguished butler greeted the young master of the Baskerville family, welcoming him inside and offering him a seat in the front row. The young master accepted with a quiet thanks. He reflected on the grim necessity of his current path, realizing he had no choice but to associate with repulsive slave traders if he wished to confront his father, who stood at the pinnacle of the underworld. To achieve this, he would require subordinates working under him. Moments later, the auctioneer, a man in a crisp white suit, dramatically announced the commencement of the slave auction to the assembled ladies and gentlemen, his voice echoing through the hall. As the auction began, 3 individuals were presented: a young, frail girl, a scarred, muscular man, and an alluring woman, all bound by chains. The bidding quickly escalated, with numbers like 100,000, 500,000, 650,000, and 700,000 being called out, while the young master observed with a serious, almost pained expression. The first lot was sold for 800,000, and the auctioneer congratulated the winning bidder. Immediately, the next lot was introduced: a beautiful blonde, blue-eyed boy, with bidding starting at 100,000. The young master watched the proceedings intently. He considered his financial standing, confident that his pockets, filled to the brim with gold coins looted from the room of the nouveau riche, held more than enough to acquire 1 or 2 slaves. He contemplated the ideal acquisition, thinking that a slave with good combat skills would be a valuable asset. As a decorative, key-like object with intricate carvings was briefly shown. He held a peculiar item to his eye, identifying it as God's Eye, an artifact he had acquired from the room of the nouveau riche. He noted its primary function was typically to appraise the abilities of monsters. The auction block displayed several individuals, chained and collared, awaiting their fate. Among them were a muscular man, a frail young girl, an alluring woman, a composed tall woman, and a stern muscular man, each with their own silent story. The God's Eye item, he realized, was also remarkably useful for inspecting opponents' skills in battle, allowing him to easily discern their proficiencies and talents. He mused that with this item, it would be simple to determine if a potential acquisition possessed skills useful in combat. However, he quickly dismissed those with only charm skills, finding them unsuitable for his specific needs. As he continued to observe the slaves, he found himself disappointed, realizing that none of the current offerings possessed the specific talents or skills he sought. He understood that while skills could be acquired later, innate abilities grew at a much faster rate, making them far more desirable. With a sigh, he turned away from the auction block, his gaze sweeping over the other attendees, a clear sign of his dissatisfaction with the current selection. Just as he considered abandoning his search for the day and exploring different methods, the auctioneer's voice boomed, announcing the final slave of the day. The auctioneer, with an excited flourish, declared the new offering to be an Oni girl from the northern demi-human continent, a race so rare it rivaled even the dragonkin. His eyes widened in shock as he processed the auctioneer's words, a look of profound surprise crossing his face. He stared intently at the newly presented slave, a young girl with white hair and white skin, golden, bright pupils, and crimson horns, the unmistakable trademark features of the demi-human race known as the Onis. He recognized her as an Ulza white ogre, a rare and powerful being, and wondered aloud why such a creature would be found in this place. He stared at the Ulza white ogre on the auction block, a profound realization dawning upon him. It was impossible. Ulza was not a character originally from the world of Yandere. He recalled that Ulza had first appeared in a separate war simulation game called Warriors of the Holy Sea, developed by the same creators as Yandere. That game was set in an island nation in the South Sea, where the objective was to gather allies and wage war against enemy nations. Ulza was meant to be one of those crucial ally characters, leaving him to wonder why she now stood in the world of Yandere. The young master pondered the strangeness of the situation, observing how the boundaries of the game's scenarios seemed to blur. He questioned what exactly was unfolding in this world. Meanwhile, the auction continued its fervent pace. The auctioneer announced bids climbing rapidly as other attendees eagerly vied for the rare Ulza white ogre. The Oni race, he knew, was exceptionally rare, aged slowly, and possessed excellent physical prowess, making her a highly coveted acquisition. He continued his internal debate, considering that this world might be a fusion of the settings from Yandere 1 and 2, as well as the world of Holy Sea. Or, perhaps, they had always been the same world from the very beginning. The bidding reached 5 million. He mused that it wouldn't be strange for the worlds of Yandere and Holy Sea to be connected, given they were developed by the same company, even if their primary settings differed. Activating his God's Eye, he appraised Ulza, revealing her innate skills, physical reinforcement at level 11, super strength at level 13, and hammer mastery at level 9. He noted with satisfaction that all 3 of her innate skills were combat-related, confirming she possessed the ideal talent he sought. However, a new dilemma arose. If the world of Holy Sea was truly connected, Ulza, who began as a slave but later became a companion to the main character, should follow that scenario. He questioned if purchasing her would force circumstances upon her, potentially entangling him in the Holy Sea protagonist's story. He continued to observe the auction hall, his gaze distant as he weighed the complex implications of his potential actions. The auctioneer's voice cut through his thoughts, announcing a bid of 6,500,000. He stood, his presence commanding, as he watched Ulza, still chained, on the platform. With a decisive motion, he raised his hand, declaring a bid of 10 million. His hand clenched, a silent testament to his resolve. As Ulza looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. He raised his hand decisively, declaring a bid of 10 million. The sudden, exorbitant sum shocked the other attendees, who murmured in disbelief, questioning the wisdom of spending so much on a single girl, even if she was a rare demi-human. He internally acknowledged the immense cost, realizing that 10 million could easily equip an entire party with the strongest gear, allowing them to take on a final boss in a game. He felt a pang of regret for the extravagance. His thoughts continued to race, contemplating the implications of his actions. He knew that rescuing the white ogre now, before her heart was shattered by the noble's cruelty, would entirely change the outcome of the war in the Holy Sea game. He wondered if his interference would disrupt the future. He clenched his jaw, unable to ignore the tragedy he knew awaited her. He reasoned that the protagonist of Holy Sea could handle a few changes to the plot, and ultimately, he could not bring himself to become a total villain like Xenon. Meanwhile, the auctioneer, beaming, announced the 10 million bid, asking if anyone would dare to compete with the handsome youth. The other bidders remained stunned, their faces contorted in expressions of shock and disbelief at the sheer audacity of the 10 million bid. Murmurs of 10 million rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer, visibly sweating, looked on with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, while the young man, now seated, exuded a dark, almost menacing aura, his eyes gleaming with determination. He leaned back, a confident smirk playing on his lips, certain that no one could possibly compete with his villainous scowl. The Ulza white ogre, standing on the stage, looked up at him, her expression a mix of surprise and slight confusion. He addressed her directly, telling her there was no need to be so scared. She flinched slightly, still processing the rapid turn of events. He offered a reassuring, if somewhat strained, smile, explaining that he was trying to help her. The Ulza white ogre blushed faintly, averting her gaze. Suddenly, an older gentleman in the crowd, with a triumphant expression, raised his hand, declaring a new bid of 10,500,000. The auctioneer, utterly flabbergasted, stammered as he announced the unexpected counterbid, asking if there were any other offers. He stared in disbelief, his eyes wide with shock as the auctioneer's voice boomed, declaring a new bid of 12 million. The crowd murmured, their faces reflecting a mix of astonishment and excitement. The auctioneer, with a flourish, announced that the Oni girl had been successfully auctioned off for that staggering sum, inviting a round of applause for the young man who had secured her. The young man, protagonist_1, raised his hand with a confident smirk, acknowledging the cheers and applause that erupted from the delighted audience. He had won. Moments later, he walked away from the main auction floor, a small, ornate book clutched in his hand, heading towards a private, curtained area. Meanwhile, within a private chamber behind the heavy drapes, Ulza stood alone, her delicate form illuminated by a soft, ethereal glow, awaiting her new master. As he entered, Ulza immediately turned to him, her eyes sparkling with an unexpected cheerfulness. She introduced herself, stating her name was Ulza, and then, with a surprising display of affection, she embraced his leg, declaring her pleasure in meeting her new master. He could only utter a surprised sound. She then declared her unwavering devotion, promising to love him forever and ever, and to dedicate herself to working for his sake. He pondered this sudden shift, recalling that in the Holy See, Ulza had always been expressionless, like a doll. He pondered if this cheerful, puppy-like demeanor was her true character, or if the past had somehow altered her. Ulza, noticing his thoughtful silence, asked what was wrong, to which he simply replied that it was nothing. He realized that her current state was likely how she truly was before she became a slave and was subjected to such harsh treatment. He realized that if he were to take her out in her current attire, his already questionable reputation would surely plummet, and someone would undoubtedly report him. Turning to his butler, he stated that he couldn't bring Ulza back with him dressed as she was, and inquired if Leopold had a change of clothes available. The butler responded with a knowing chuckle, suggesting that there might indeed be something suitable in the slave's waiting room. As the time came for Ulza to be fitted for new clothes, protagonist_1 gently reassured her, telling her there was nothing to fear and that he would be waiting. He instructed her to go with Leopold, but she clung to him, asking if he truly would wait for her, expressing a clear reluctance to leave his side. Meanwhile, he stood amidst a vast selection of garments, his gaze sweeping over the various styles and fabrics, contemplating the perfect attire for her. He then settled into a chair, a thoughtful escaping his lips as he pondered the implications of Ulza's transformation and her newfound attachment. Moments later, a voice called from behind a changing curtain, announcing that she had finished. He responded, telling her to come out and reveal her new look. Her feet, now clad in elegant shoes, began to emerge from beneath the curtain, signaling the imminent reveal of her complete transformation. Ulza burst through the curtains with a cheerful flourish, proudly displaying her new black shoes. Zenon, startled by her sudden appearance, quickly admonished her, reminding her that simply putting on shoes was not enough. She needed to get fully dressed. Despite his stern tone, Ulza beamed, expressing her delight at finally having shoes. As Zenon considered the situation, the butler interjected, advising him against removing Ulza's collar. The ornate collar, clearly visible around Ulza's neck, bore the engraved name Zenon Vaskerville, a detail that seemed to weigh heavily on Zenon's mind. Ulza then explained the gravity of the situation, stating that if her collar were removed, she would become an ownerless slave, a status that would expose her to significant danger. She further clarified that the collar bore her young master's name, unequivocally identifying Zenon as her owner. The butler elaborated on the perils, explaining that slaves without owners possessed no human rights whatsoever. Zenon, his arms crossed in contemplation, pressed for more specific details, questioning what kind of dangers they were referring to. The butler then painted a stark picture, illustrating that Ulza, being a member of the highly valued Oni race, would be vulnerable to severe exploitation. He explained that if someone were to kidnap or assault her on the street without her collar, it would not even be considered a crime, showing a grim scene of people being attacked and dragged away as an example. Zenon grimaced, the harsh reality of the situation dawning on him as he recalled the implications. The butler reinforced his point, emphasizing that if Ulza's status as Zenon's property wasn't clearly displayed, someone could immediately attempt to seize her. The world's grim truth became clearer. In the Slayer Kingdom, demi-humans were of low status, and in many towns, they existed solely as slaves. This was largely due to the kingdom's strained relations with the Elven and Dwarven kingdoms. Ulza, with her distinct horns, was undeniably a demi-human, and the absence of a slave collar would mean she had no owner, condemning her to the horrific treatment reserved for runaway slaves. Despite this, Zenon internally maintained that he had no interest in keeping girls collared. Ulza, however, looked up at Zenon with a bright smile, declaring that the collar served as proof of her belonging to him, and that she liked it a great deal. Her earnest acceptance seemed to catch Zenon by surprise. She listened as Zenon, still conflicted, conceded that if she was content with the collar, he would not dwell on it further, though he remained unconvinced by the situation. The butler then offered to escort Zenon to his room, assuring him that no one would disturb them for a while, granting them ample privacy. He watched the butler depart, leaving him in a lavish room adorned with a large, heart-shaped bed and romantic lighting. Zenon pondered if the butler had gravely misunderstood his intentions. Moments later, Ulza, now in the room, began to strip off her simple dress with an excited cry, declaring her readiness to begin. His eyes widened in alarm as she continued to disrobe, prompting him to shout in a panic, demanding to know why she was suddenly stripping. He quickly handed her a shirt, emphatically stating that they were not going to engage in such activities, clarifying that he was not a lulakan and had no interest in little girls. Ulza, however, innocently questioned if they were not going to make babies now. He firmly poked her forehead, explaining that they needed to acquire equipment for her, as she could not possibly enter a dungeon dressed as she was. Her eyes immediately sparkled with intense excitement at the mention of the dungeon. Zenon reiterated that he had no interest in making her a sex slave. His sole reason for purchasing her was to enhance his combat power within the dungeon. She bounced with unbridled joy, exclaiming that even as a slave, the prospect of entering a dungeon was a dream come true, and that she adored fighting. Her face beamed with happiness as she declared her eagerness for killing a lot and stealing a lot, a sentiment Zenon's hand confirmed was fitting for an Oni, a warrior race known for their love of combat. Zenon reflected on Ulza's previous words, finding it difficult to reconcile her adorable appearance with the scary things she said. He simply acknowledged her enthusiasm, unsure how else to react. He then led her to a vast chamber, revealing an enormous, glittering pile of weapons, armor, and accessories. Zenon stood beside the mountain of gear, ready to equip her for their adventures. He explained that while he couldn't equip the items himself, he had meticulously stocked up on gear specifically for a female companion, anticipating the day a woman might join his team. He asked if the accessories and weapons were suitable for her to begin with. Ulza, eager and energetic, quickly responded that she understood. Zenon instructed her to try on the equipment for now, assuring her they could make adjustments if any problems arose. Moments later, Ulza emerged, now clad in a new, more practical outfit consisting of a crop top, short skirt, and arm guards. She declared the equipment nice and comfortable, while Zenon observed her transformation with a thoughtful expression. Her new attire included sturdy boots and a reinforced collar, completing her warrior ensemble. She then presented a massive, spiked club, boasting that such good armor and weapons were rare, even in human kingdoms. Zenon recognized it as a blunt-type weapon, an Oni's club, known for its tyrannical power to knock enemies off their feet and crush their skulls. He knew such weapons often dropped from goblins and required blunt weapon skills, which were rarely possessed by characters in the game, leaving the weapon largely unused. Ulza, swinging the heavy club with surprising ease, exclaimed her love for it, and vowed to use her master's present with care. Zenon, smiling, remarked that it truly suited her, though he couldn't help but wonder if it wasn't too heavy for her. With a determined glint in her eyes, Ulza promised to put her all into slaughtering Zenon's enemies, proclaiming that with the club in hand, she could take on any foe. Zenon chuckled, pleased that she liked it. As she continued to swing the club, Zenon, observing her, internally questioned if all Oni were this crazy about fighting, and if her actions didn't hurt her. Ulza, now fully equipped, embraced Zenon tightly, declaring her love for him. He, taken aback, questioned her intense attachment, wondering why she felt such fondness for him after only a brief acquaintance, especially since he had only acquired her to assist with dungeon exploration. She explained her feelings, stating that her master was cool and handsome, making her happy to belong to such a wonderful gentleman. Zenon, hearing this, internally scoffed, wondering if she had truly seen him, as he believed his sharp, angled features made him look more like a villain. He continued his internal lament, recalling how girls in his class would give him a wide berth and scream in terror whenever he laughed. Meanwhile, Ulza's new, sturdy boots, part of her combat gear, were clearly visible. Despite his self-doubt, Ulza reaffirmed her sincerity, confirming her admiration. She then elaborated on her ideal type, describing a man with fierce, killer eyes, a pointy, evil nose, and sharp teeth that could tear through flesh. A true, legendary Oni god. She further confessed that the moment their eyes met at the auction, she knew it was love at first sight, feeling it was fate to be bought by such a lovely master. Zenon, overwhelmed by the unexpected praise, felt an unfamiliar sensation, as if tears were about to flow, despite being complimented by a girl for the first time. He acknowledged her feelings, admitting that while he couldn't exactly say he was satisfied, it was certainly better than her hating him. He then urged her to finish changing so they could depart. As Ulza, now fully dressed in her new combat attire and wielding her club, eagerly ran out of the room, the butler observed her departure. He mused that the young master seemed just as potent in his affections as the boss, before turning his attention towards the door. The butler then approached Zenon, bowing respectfully as he promised to gather more suitable slaves for the next auction and humbly await his next visit. Zenon, weary of the conversation, dismissed him, stating it was too troublesome to even bother correcting his assumptions. Outside, the city streets lay quiet under the evening sky, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights, as Zenon prepared to leave the auction house district. As they walked through the city, Zenon noted the absence of the annoying stares they had received earlier, finding it much easier to navigate during this time of day. He realized it would take about an hour to reach home and that they should arrive before sundown. He observed Ulza, who, despite carrying the massive club, moved with surprising lightness, almost like a bunny. As he walked, a sudden glint caught Ulza's sharp eye. She instinctively gripped his jacket, a silent warning. Ulza, now armed with a formidable spiked club, turned to him, prompting him to ask what was wrong. His own eyes widened, instantly perceiving the danger she had sensed. Ahead, in the dim light of the narrow street, three menacing figures emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. They were surrounded, with more figures lurking in the alleys and behind walls, as Zenon and Ulza continued their walk, seemingly unfazed. From the shadows, the familiar figure of the butler stepped forward, declaring their reunion. Zenon, glancing back, acknowledged the ambush with a sardonic remark, noting their good work. The butler's face twisted into a smug, malevolent grin, clearly pleased with his trap. He then launched into a furious tirade, demanding to know if Zenon truly didn't remember him, given the incredible sum of 12 million Zenon had spent. He likened himself to a pebble on the side of the road, expressing his indignation at being forgotten. Zenon, however, simply pointed at him, asking who he was again. A moment of realization dawned on Zenon as he processed the butler's words, understanding that this man was responsible for him spending more than he had initially intended at the auction. He confronted the butler, demanding to know what business a loser had with him, especially after bringing along a group of intimidating figures. The butler, however, offered a polite apology, explaining that auctions were inherently a game of winning and losing, and asked for Zenon's forgiveness. Despite his earlier apology, the butler's expression twisted into a sinister smile as he extended an invitation to Zenon, claiming they were having a fun party and wished for him to join. Under his breath, he muttered a derogatory term for Zenon, revealing his true contempt. The butler's eye gleamed with malice as he internally fumed, realizing Zenon had not given up on Ulza, and that his own loss of her was unbearable. He then addressed Zenon directly, asking if it would be acceptable for him to simply take this pseudo-human Ulza. He warned that if Zenon complied willingly, he would only suffer broken bones, implying a far worse fate if he resisted. As the butler spoke, Zenon and Ulza found themselves completely encircled by a multitude of armed thugs in a desolate, cobblestone alley, their escape routes cut off. From an elevated position, the butler reiterated his demand, ordering Zenon to hand Ulza over. Zenon looked up at him, a daring, almost amused smile playing on his lips, despite being surrounded. He pondered his next move. The young man, Zenon, looked at the portly butler, who chuckled nervously. Zenon inquired about the term pseudo-human, noting it was common in his country, but seemingly unknown here. The butler explained that it referred to demi-human beings with a human-like constitution, prompting Zenon to wonder if it was just him who found the term unfamiliar. Meanwhile, the small demon girl, Ulza, stood defiantly, a spiked club in hand, her expression one of pure fury. She found the notion of demi-humans being considered inferior beings utterly infuriating. Back with Zenon and the butler, the latter declared his intention to beat Zenon and send him packing, refusing to hand over Ulza. He stated that she was his woman and he would not surrender her. Ulza, hearing this, blushed deeply and felt incredibly moved. The butler, however, grew enraged, stating he hated undisciplined brats and would kill Zenon on the spot if he dared to throw away his life. The butler, now consumed by his ambition, imagined the immense financial resources required to pay a sum like 12 million in one go. He believed himself to be a person of high status and a noble, certain that the world would not end so easily. He then declared that he could not hold back, convinced that if he could acquire the girl, he would achieve an even higher status. He believed that by offering a pseudo-human as rare as an Oni, he would definitely be able to please a certain powerful person and soar to even greater heights as that person's right hand. As the butler ranted with exaggerated tone and theatrical movements, Zenon recognized him. He realized the butler was from the Kiran kingdom and that he knew this man. Zenon then pressed the butler, asking if the person he had mentioned earlier was Zagitros, the marshal general of the Kiran kingdom. The butler's face contorted in a shocked gasp, utterly taken aback by Zenon's knowledge. The butler, still reeling from the revelation, stammered, asking how Zenon knew. Zenon, with a slight smirk, confirmed his suspicion, asking if he was spot on. The narrator then revealed that while the name of this particular mob character was not remembered, both he and Zagitros were enemy characters appearing in the Holy See. Deep within a dark, cavernous space, numerous demi-human girls were held captive in individual cages. Among them, Ulza was destined to become a slave to General Zagitros, a man known for his perverse obsession with collecting young demi-humans of various races. He considered the implications of this revelation, realizing that the butler's actions, offering Ulza to Zagitros, were likely the very merit that allowed him to become the general's aide. This understanding brought a sense of clarity to Zenon, as he also recalled a separate scenario where a protagonist from the Holy See saved a demi-human girl, becoming her companion. The butler, utterly bewildered, stammered, demanding to know how Zenon knew his identity and his superior. Zenon, however, remained composed, stating he had no obligation to reveal his sources. His identity now fully exposed, the butler's composure shattered. He clenched his fist, his face contorted in rage, and declared that Zenon would die right there, signaling to his waiting ambushers. He found the butler's sudden aggression easy to understand. Zenon acknowledged the strange presence of a noble from the Kiran kingdom in this territory, but he was more than willing to strike back against the ensuing attack. He reflected on the situation, noting that he seemed to have meddled in the Holy See's scenario once again. He concluded that reducing the number of enemies would certainly not harm the protagonist of that narrative. Zenon then turned to Ulza, informing her that it was time for her first job and instructing her to prepare her weapon. He offered a small thanks for letting him have her, to which Ulza, now holding a formidable spiked club, responded with an eager, "Alrighty." She stood ready, a truly adorable face now beset with the expression of a true warrior, though she internally mused that her master wanted her to wait. Meanwhile, Zenon raised his hand, summoning an ancient tome into existence. the grimoire of dark magic. He began to chant, arcane symbols erupting from the ground around him as he prepared his spell. The butler, witnessing this display of power, frantically screamed for his men to kill Xenon before it was too late. With a fierce, almost demonic grin, Xenon unleashed his dark element AoE magic, Blood Carpet. The powerful spell erupted, engulfing the area in a torrent of destructive energy. His dark magic, the Blood Carpet, erupted from the ground in a torrent of jagged, obsidian spikes, impaling the ambushers and sending their bodies flying through the air. The brutal assault continued as the spikes tore through flesh, eliciting agonizing screams from the unfortunate targets. The butler, caught in the initial surge, was sent tumbling to the ground. Xenon observed the gruesome aftermath, a hand covering his mouth as a wave of nausea washed over him. He mused that dark magic seemed to be nothing but brutal torture, much like the magic his own father once wielded. Turning to Ulza, he calmly stated that only the ambushers behind them remained. She responded with a predatory grin, declaring her eagerness to slaughter every last one of them. With a fierce battle cry, Ulza charged, swinging the spiked club Xenon had given her. Her target, one of the remaining ambushers, watched in wide-eyed terror as she brought the heavy weapon down. Her attack connected with devastating force, the spiked club tearing through the ambusher's body with a sickening crunch. Another ambusher, witnessing the brutal display, cursed Ulza, calling her a monster as she continued her relentless assault. Enraged, an ambusher leaped at Ulza with a drawn sword, shouting a challenge. She met his strike with her spiked club, blocking the blow with surprising ease. The ambusher struggled, pushing his sword against her club, desperately demanding that she release her grip. Ulza, however, held firm, her expression unwavering. With a sudden burst of dark energy and a flurry of bats, Ulza unleashed a powerful counterattack, swinging her club with such force that it sent the ambusher flying with a terrified shriek. She stood over the last remaining ambusher, who desperately pleaded for his life. With a chilling smile, she informed him that she would slaughter all of her master's enemies, and he was the final one left. Without hesitation, she hurled her spiked club with immense force, sending it spinning through the air towards the fleeing foe. Xenon watched, acknowledging her formidable strength. Moments later, she returned to Xenon, proudly announcing that her task was complete. He gently patted her head, praising her good work, and she leaned into his touch, clearly enjoying the affection. As the last of the direct attackers were dealt with, Xenon turned his attention to the cowering butler, who frantically begged him to wait. Xenon calmly stated that his companions were gone and asked what he should do with him now. The butler, desperate, declared himself a noble of the Curon kingdom, warning that killing him would cause a diplomatic incident. Xenon, however, countered that the incident had already begun the moment they attacked him, a noble of this kingdom. He then suggested that the butler had likely planned to dispose of his body and evidence, and Xenon would simply return the favor, adding that he should have quietly accepted his loss at the auction. Xenon found himself naturally assuming he would kill the noble, yet he felt no guilt. He reflected that this was the first time he had killed 3 people with magic, and his heart remained completely cold. Dark, swirling energy began to emanate from him. He pondered if he had truly become Xenon Baskerville, body and soul, or if he was always this kind of person, which was why Xenon had chosen him. Meanwhile, the butler continued to plead for his life, offering any amount of money. Ulza, having retrieved her club, returned to Xenon's side, confirming his decision. Xenon then stated, with a sinister grin, that he was unfortunately not strapped for cash. With Xenon's implicit command, Ulza raised her spiked club high above her head, ready to strike. The terrified butler screamed in protest, begging her to wait. Her eyes widened slightly, a hint of anticipation in her gaze, as she declared, "Ready, set, go." The butler's face contorted in pure horror, his eyes wide with the realization of his imminent demise. With a brutal swing, Ulza brought her spiked club down upon the noble, ending his life. Xenon watched the gruesome act with a detached expression, simply remarking, "Oh my." He was startled, realizing he had not detected any presence at all. He urgently called for Ulza to return, while she, already some distance away, looked back with a questioning gaze. His thoughts raced, acknowledging that if even he, with his growing powers, failed to notice, it was concerning. But if Ulza, a member of a warrior race, also missed it, then the threat was truly formidable. Ulza, hearing his concern, quickly confirmed she was all right. As Ulza scanned their surroundings, her spiked club ready, she demanded to know where their unseen adversaries were. Xenon, his expression grim, also searched the empty street, sensing the lingering presence of an unknown foe. A calm, familiar voice cut through the tension, assuring Xenon that there was no need for wariness, addressing him respectfully as Xenon Baskerville-sama. Suddenly, a cloaked and masked figure stood triumphantly over Xenon, who lay defeated on the cobblestones, a foot pressing down on his head. The mysterious assailant, their identity obscured, looked down and questioned, "Who the hell are you?" A masked figure, cloaked in dark attire, suddenly appeared before Xenon. He immediately suspected the individual was one of his father's subordinates, tasked with keeping him under surveillance. The figure, however, introduced themselves as a member of the Assassination Corps, serving Master Baskerville, and clarified that Lesbold himself had entrusted them with this mission. Xenon, though still questioning their identity, curtly thanked them for their intervention. Such precautions were necessary, for it was a common occurrence for prominent customers to be ambushed on their journey home after attending an auction. Thus, a dedicated escort was always assigned the duty of safeguarding these esteemed patrons. He continued, explaining that auctions served not merely as a method of commerce, but also as a form of high entertainment, a grand stage upon which one could openly display their financial might. Zenon absorbed this information, a look of understanding dawning on his face as he observed the scene, which included a young woman held by a leash. Ulza stood nearby, clutching a formidable, spiked club. Zenon internally acknowledged the precariousness of his situation, realizing that acquiring an expensive slave without the protection of an escort, as he had done, was tantamount to inviting robbers to attack him. Yet, the masked figure, now kneeling on the cracked ground, assured him that no escort had been necessary. They declared that the future of the Baskerville family was indeed in capable hands, a testament to the successor's abilities. Ulza, seemingly pleased, affirmed their readiness. He then informed her they were heading home, while privately dismissing the assassin's words, harboring no interest in being judged as the successor to his father. The masked figure, remaining in their kneeling posture, wished him a safe journey. They then promised to dispose of the insolent fool's corpse, leaving Zenon with a subtle frown as he departed. The masked assassin, having dealt with the corpse, looked forward to the day he would meet the successor of the Baskerville Hellhound again. Zenon, accompanied by Ulza, walked away from the grand building under the night sky. Later, Zenon lay on his bed, letting out a sigh of exhaustion or relief. He reflected on the events, acknowledging that it had only been 2 weeks since he arrived in this world, and today marked his first kill. He considered his actions necessary and felt no regret, yet questioned if he was inherently ruthless or if occupying Zenon's mind and body was influencing him. Despite his lack of guilt over committing murder, he found it abnormal, especially since he was an ordinary working-class Japanese person until recently. He understood that someone from a combat-oriented race like Ulza might kill, but he knew that if he remained hesitant about killing, he would never be able to continue in the future. Regardless of the reasoning, he felt he should be happy about his newfound resolve. He knew that beyond the hostile monsters encountered in Danbury, he would eventually have to face evil cultists worshipping the Demon King, pirates, and various other criminals. Much had transpired, but now, with a reliable companion, he could actually explore the dungeon. He decided to view his ability to defeat enemies without hesitation as a definite strength in combat, a positive development. With Ulza's strength, his chances of survival had significantly increased, but he knew that no matter how much game knowledge he possessed, playing solo would eventually lead to a wall. Ideally, he desired a magic user and a healer, as a team of just 2 attackers was unbalanced. Still, he concluded that the scenario was in its early stages, and there was no need to rush. Suddenly, Ulza burst into the room, covered in suds and a towel, crying out for her master. She stumbled towards him, complaining that her eyes hurt and accusing the maid of bullying her, while Zenon, startled, covered his mouth, a hint of blood visible. A female slave, also wrapped in a towel, appeared behind Ulza, scolding her for running to young Master Zenon and hugging him in such a state. Zenon, with a nosebleed, stared in shock. She continued to wash Ulza, who, with soap in her eyes, thrashed wildly, kicking Zenon. He, too, was now covered in suds, his eyes stinging from the soap. Despite Zenon's struggle, she calmly informed him that he would not be able to pull Ulza off, as the Oni race was known for its strength. Moments later, Leviena, now in the bath herself, provocatively invited the young master to join them. Zenon's eyes widened in shock at her suggestion. She teased him about his embarrassment, noting that even he, the young master, seemed flustered after all this time. A lingering question arose. Did Zenon regularly bathe with Leviena, suggesting a deeper relationship than mere servitude? Later, Zenon lay in bed, groaning in distress. He internally rationalized his predicament, convincing himself that he did not truly desire to bathe with Leviena, but rather, it was a necessary act to prevent his true identity from being revealed. With a clenched fist, he resolved to go through with it sooner rather than later. With his decision made, he affirmed his readiness, and Leviena led the way, her form captivating his gaze as he followed. Soon, he found himself in the bath, with Ulza gently washing his hair, her small hands carefully working the suds. He looked utterly flustered by the intimacy. The bath concluded with all 3 of them submerged in the warm water, bubbles floating around them. Leviena gave a satisfied wink and a thumbs up, pleased with the outcome. After the bath, Ulza, now clean and dressed in striped pajamas, declared her intention to sleep with her master. Leviena, however, firmly intervened, explaining that Ulza's own bed was being prepared. Zenon, still overwhelmed, could only watch the exchange. Despite Leviena's efforts, the compromise resulted in Ulza sleeping beside Zenon, clinging tightly to him. He lay awake, sighing, wondering how he would ever manage to sleep in such a predicament. He lay in the opulent bed, his mind reeling from the previous night's events, wondering what kind of ordeal this new life had become. As morning finally arrived, he reflected on the unforgettable bath time, vehemently asserting to himself that he had done nothing untoward, not even lifting a finger. Yet, the morning brought little respite, as he found himself still sharing the bed with both Ulza and Leviena, his weary expression betraying his thought. Is every single day going to be like this? He pondered the potential reactions of both Leviena and Ulza if he were to make a move, considering whether it would simplify matters, or at the very least, what the worst outcome might be. His internal struggle continued, reminding himself that Ulza was merely a child, even as the small demon girl, with an innocent plea, asked for a hug. Ulza stood before him, completely unclad and with arms outstretched, reiterating her desire for affection. He internally rationalized that he had acquired her to boost his combat power, not for such interactions, and certainly had no interest in hugging a little girl. He then questioned her actual age, wondering if she simply didn't look it. His mind raced, considering the possibility that she might be older than she appeared, perhaps even at an age where such advances would be acceptable. Overwhelmed by sleep deprivation, he felt his brain short-circuiting, urging himself to resist the urge to simply let the momentum take over. Just then, Ulza stirred, softly calling out, "Master," before cheerfully wishing him a good morning. He observed her closely, confirming his initial assessment. She was undeniably just a child, certainly not of an age to be considered otherwise. Meanwhile, Leviena also began to stir, slowly waking before turning to Xenon and politely asking if he had slept well. His face contorted in exasperation. He emphatically declared that he had, obviously, not slept well. He began his day with breakfast, served by Leviena, who promised to handle the morning preparations immediately. Ulza, meanwhile, peered over the table, observing the meal. Later, as they prepared to depart, he called out to Ulza, informing her they were heading out. He reminded her of their conversation the previous night about going to the academy. She responded with an enthusiastic declaration, promising not to cause any fuss or throw a tantrum. He found her response good, reflecting on his decision to bring her along to the Royal Academy of Sword and Magic, noting that many nobles and royals brought their own maids and attendants. His decision stemmed from a recent change. The school curriculum would now include dungeon exploration and monster hunting outside the city. Because of this, he had to bring Ulza along, as she would be joining him in the dungeons. As they descended the steps, he sternly warned her that if she caused any trouble at the academy, she would be banned from the school grounds. Ulza, beaming with excitement, promised to be on her best behavior to stay with her master. Moments later, they departed in a grand carriage, with the butler bidding them a safe journey. He mused that since she had declared her intentions so clearly, she likely wouldn't cause any trouble. Inside, Ulza pressed her face against the window, marveling at the passing scenery. Inside the carriage, Ulza continued to hum a cheerful tune, her back to him as she gazed out the window. He sat across from her, arms crossed, observing her quiet joy. She then began to sing aloud, a simple, happy melody about going to school with her master. He remained silent, a thoughtful expression on his face. Ulza continued her song, now about the many houses they were passing. He wondered internally about the strange song and the source of her overwhelming happiness. As Ulza leaned against him, still humming about how much fun she was having, he looked out the window, a new question forming in his mind. Would bringing her along truly be all right? Ulza, her eyes wide with innocent yet unsettling joy, sang gleefully of killing and murdering, finding immense fun in the prospect. Her expression was one of pure, unbridled happiness, despite the dark nature of her words. Meanwhile, as the carriage departed the Grand Academy, he felt a profound sense of unease. He confessed internally that he was feeling super uneasy about this, a lingering sense of impending doom settling upon him after the long night. A grand, ornate carriage pulled up to the magnificent academy building, its arrival drawing the attention of onlookers. From within, a young woman with blonde pigtails and a young man with dark hair gracefully disembarked, their presence noted by two observing students. The students continued to watch as the ornate carriage departed, disappearing into the distance. One of them remarked that it must belong to the Baskerville family, a statement that elicited a surprised query from another. Inside the academy grounds, the arrival of Ulza, a small demon girl, caused an immediate stir among the students. They whispered about her cuteness, her horns, and the collar around her neck, questioning if she was a demi-human slave. Xenon, walking beside her, internally acknowledged that he had underestimated the attention they would draw. Ulza, oblivious to the whispers, excitedly exclaimed that this must be Master's Academy and expressed her joy at being able to come along. Xenon, with a slight smile, told her to lead the way. However, his smile quickly faded as he asked her if she even knew the way to the classroom, advising her to stay behind him and be good. Despite Xenon's concern, Ulza confidently strode ahead, leading him and the other students through the bustling academy grounds. As they approached the Grand Academy building, the students behind them expressed unease, noting Ulza's innocent yet potentially mischievous face. She glanced back with a playful, wide-eyed expression. Ulza hails from the demi-human continent, a land untouched by human presence. She belongs to a combat-oriented race and was raised within that culture. The question lingered, would she adapt to the social intricacies of academy life? She hummed cheerfully, assuring Xenon that everything would be fine, as she had repeatedly told him she would simply act as his attendant. Xenon, however, let out a soft groan, appearing unwell. Noticing his discomfort, she looked up at him with concern, asking if his stomach hurt. He gently patted her head, reassuring her that he was fine, merely lost in thought as they stood before the Grand Academy building, surrounded by other students. Xenon then turned to Ulza, his expression serious, and warned her not to do anything that would cause him trouble. He emphasized that she must listen to whatever he told her, and then there would be no problems. As they continued to walk, Xenon realized there was one important thing he had forgotten to mention. He reflected that trouble was not always something that stemmed from oneself. Just then, a young man with blonde hair, Leon Brave, suddenly called out to Xenon, his voice sharp and accusatory. Xenon turned, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, as Leon declared that trouble could always approach on its own. Leon, known as the protagonist of Danbury and an embodiment of justice, pointed an accusing finger at Xenon. He demanded to know who Ulza was and how Xenon could put a slave collar on such a young child. Leon declared he had misjudged Xenon, calling him a scoundrel for he was a passionate man who would risk his life for a girl he just met, not one who would turn a blind eye to a little girl being treated as a slave. Leon continued his tirade, exclaiming that he should have known Zenon was a scoundrel, despite saving their classmates in the dungeon the other day. He admitted he had actually thought Zenon might not be a bad guy, but now saw him as an oblivious troublemaker. Zenon simply clicked his tongue, his expression darkening with irritation at the public accusation. He pondered how he would deal with this unexpected turn of events. He knew that if things went according to the scenario, Leon was destined to defeat the Demon King and save the world. Zenon internally reaffirmed his intention to avoid involvement with Leon or interfering with the plot, provided he did not go and steal the heroines away. He found himself questioning why Leon, the self-proclaimed protagonist, was the one getting involved in his affairs, especially in such a public manner. Despite acknowledging Ulza's status as a slave, he pondered the true nature of Leon's objection. Leon, meanwhile, vehemently demanded Ulza's freedom, leaving the small demon girl looking up in confusion. Zenon, frustrated by the unexpected turns of events, internally cursed the heavens, realizing that reality diverged significantly from the games he knew. As the confrontation escalated, Zenon calmly explained to the growing crowd of students, including Leon and a blonde student named Seal, that Ulza had become his slave through proper legal procedures and purchase, permitted by the school's regulations for bringing attendance. Leon, however, remained indignant, declaring that rules did not justify enslaving a young girl and that it was morally wrong for any human being. Zenon observed Seal, noting her similar sense of justice to Leon, especially when it came to women and children. She then challenged him, asking if he intended to take Ulza by force if her enslavement was truly unforgivable. He internally acknowledged the legal complexities, knowing that in this kingdom, slaves were recognized as property, and forcefully liberating one would constitute the crime of theft or robbery. The crowd, including Seal and Leon, watched intently. Zenon reflected on Leon's persistent tendency to meddle in unnecessary troubles, taking the long way around and wasting resources. Leon, undeterred by Zenon's legal arguments, then shifted his approach, asking how much it would cost to purchase Ulza and release her from slavery. He mused internally that protagonists were often righteous to a fault, and that perhaps the essence of such scenarios was to enjoy these unnecessary detours, much like in an RPG. Zenon firmly refused Leon's offer, stating he would not sell Ulza, his precious subordinate and attendant, no matter the price. He then dismissively told Leon to leave, indicating they would see each other later in the classroom. Enraged by Zenon's dismissal, Leon lunged forward, his fist drawn back, shouting that Zenon still didn't understand, calling him a damn idiot. As Leon's punch hurtled towards Zenon, Ulza, with a fierce determination, stepped forward, declaring she would not allow him to lay a hand on her master. Zenon, observing the impending impact, internally calculated that he would have to endure the blow, recognizing that using violence against a defenseless person in front of so many witnesses would only make Leon appear to be the villain. She descended from above, a small, furious figure wielding a spiked club, aiming directly for Leon. Both Zenon and Leon looked up, caught in the sudden, violent turn of events. Her attack struck the ground with immense force, shattering the pavement and sending Leon reeling backward with a cry of shock. Zenon watched, his expression unreadable. Undeterred, she charged forward, her small body radiating fierce determination as she swung her weapon. She declared with absolute conviction that she would slaughter anyone who dared to be an enemy of her master. He attempted to reason with her, urging her to calm down and talk, all while desperately dodging her relentless, powerful swings. Ulza, however, continued her assault, shouting fierce battle cries. As she pressed her attack, Leon struggled to defend himself. The blonde student, along with others, desperately pleaded with Ulza, explaining that Leon was not her enemy and only wished to free her from the bonds of slavery. Her eyes, however, gleamed with an unyielding resolve, and she declared that there was no room for discussion on the matter. She continued her relentless pursuit of Leon, swinging her club with terrifying speed, causing the surrounding students to scatter in fear. Zenon watched the chaos unfold, a single thought crossing his mind. Scary. He clutched his head, snapping out of his daze, and realized with a jolt that this was no time to be spacing out. It was his duty as her master to stop his attendant. As she continued to declare her intent to slaughter her master's enemies, he rushed towards her, desperately shouting for her to stop and sit. She remained in her frenzied attack, seemingly oblivious to her surroundings. Zenon realized that when Ulza entered her battle mode, she completely lost track of everything else, wondering if this was the true nature of a berserker. He quickly admonished himself, realizing it was no time to be impressed. He watched as the chaos escalated around him, students screaming for a teacher and urging others to flee, fearing they would be dragged into the escalating violence. Ulza, still in her berserker state, continued her rampage, striking out at anyone who approached. As the situation worsened, he realized with a grim determination that he had to stop Ulza, even if it meant getting hurt himself. He knew the protagonist, Leon, could not die here, and he braced himself for the worst, preparing to intervene. However, before he could act, Ulza, with a terrifying cry, launched herself at Leon, aiming a powerful kick directly at his chest. Her attack was swift and brutal, intended to crush him completely. The impact sent Leon reeling, his eyes wide with shock and pain as the force of the blow coursed through him. He collapsed to the ground, convulsing and gasping for air, utterly incapacitated by Ulza's overwhelming power. His sword lay discarded nearby, a testament to his swift and brutal defeat. Witnessing the devastating aftermath of Ulza's attack, Xenon's face contorted in horror and despair. Around him, the other students recoiled in terror, their faces reflecting the sheer shock and fear of the unfolding violence. As Ulza prepared to deliver a finishing blow to the fallen Leon, Xenon finally intervened, extending his hand and urgently commanding her to stop. She paused, her berserker state momentarily confused by his voice, asking if it was time for them to make kids. He sternly reprimanded the now confused Ulza, calling her a crazy, out-of-control girl, and quickly led her away from the scene. Meanwhile, the other students continued to panic, some calling for a teacher while others checked on the unconscious Leon. With Ulza now calm and clinging to him, Xenon looked utterly distraught, profusely apologizing for the chaos and injuries she had caused. The scene settled into a grim tableau as other students gathered around the severely injured Leon, who lay motionless on the ground. The narrative questioned if this was truly the end for the protagonist, lamenting, "Rest in peace, Leon." Two figures carried a boy on a stretcher, while nearby, students discussed a recent incident. One student, Leon Quinn, admitted to resorting to violence, but another clarified that a little lady had protected Baskerville and launched a counterattack, proving to be the stronger combat. The discussion continued among a group of students outside a Grand Academy building. They concluded that Leon Quinn was likely the one at fault, having suddenly demanded someone sell their slave to him. Whispers of Xenon Quinn circulated through the crowd. Inside a grand hallway, an Academy official addressed Xenon Quinn and the Oni girl. He explained that the Academy had decided not to pursue the matter publicly to avoid conflict between houses, but acknowledged that while Leon Quinn was at fault, Xenon Quinn had also used excessive force. The official entrusted Xenon Quinn with keeping things under control. Xenon Quinn, in turn, warned the Oni girl that if she went berserk again, he would never take her to the Academy. He also requested the official ensure someone monitored her behavior. The Oni girl, rubbing her head, agreed to his terms. Later, in a large, tiered classroom, students were seated, attending their lessons. Xenon Quinn and the Oni girl were among them, now seemingly integrated into the academic environment. As Xenon Quinn walked through the classroom, a student with spiky hair, John, approached him, asking if he remembered him from the gargoyle incident. Xenon Quinn, however, did not recall him. John then called out to the Oni girl, addressing her as Baskerville. John continued to speak with Xenon Quinn and the Oni girl, noting that brave Quinn had picked a fight and that Xenon Quinn had endured a rough morning. Meanwhile, other students whispered about the incident, observing that Leon was popular, but Xenon, with his resting villain face, received all the animosity. They also commented that walking around accompanied by a cute little girl with a slave collar felt like a crime. John then told Xenon Quinn that his features were actually quite decent, making it a mystery why he looked so scary. Xenon Quinn, visibly annoyed, told him to leave him alone, stating there was nothing he could do about his face. John merely winked, implying Xenon already possessed that face. He found himself in a chaotic situation as Elisa, a fellow student, enthusiastically embraced the Oni girl, exclaiming how incredibly cute she was and expressing a desire to keep her as a pet. The Oni girl, clearly uncomfortable, demanded to be released, while John, observing the scene, celebrated Xenon's rescue of him, believing it had dispelled any negative opinions about Xenon's lineage. Her discomfort quickly escalated into a visible surge of anger, causing her to glow with a menacing aura. John quickly intervened, explaining that Elisa simply loved small animals and wasn't trying to treat demi-humans as pets, merely being friendly. He understood the explanation, but Elisa seemed taken aback by the Oni girl's intense reaction. He reflected on the incident, acknowledging his own partial blame for the situation, as Leon had initiated the fight that led to Ulza's rampage. Despite this, he found her lingering grudge frustrating, a terrifying thing, as John commented, noting that a woman's grudge was truly formidable. Still visibly annoyed, the Oni girl remained in Elisa's grasp as a teacher's voice echoed through the hall, announcing that class was about to begin. Days passed, and Leon remained absent from the academy, missing the next day and the day after that. His physical injuries should have healed with magic, but the mental shock from the incident seemed to have inflicted significant damage. He mused that Leon would likely take some time to recover, which was only natural for a man after such an ordeal. John, however, pointed out that it had already been a week, questioning if that wasn't too long. Regardless, he admitted that thanks to the absence of the annoying protagonist, he had been able to live a peaceful school life. He noticed her glaring at him as always, but she showed no intention of approaching or speaking to him, simply holding her cup with a stern expression. Moments later, Elisa approached the Oni girl, offering her a dish and asking if she wanted to eat it. She readily accepted the offer. Other students, including a male and female classmate, also offered her dessert, asking if she wanted theirs too. The Oni girl, now holding a fork and knife, looked delighted by the generosity. She devoured the large spread of food, particularly enjoying the meat, exclaiming how delicious it all was. Because of Ulza's presence, he realized the negative effect of his resting villain face seemed to have reduced a bit, and his classmates had actually started talking to him more, finding the Oni girl incredibly cute. The Oni girl, Ulza-chan, found herself surrounded by doting students, who showered her with food and compliments, comparing her vigorous eating to a cute pet or a hamster with stuffed cheeks. She, however, expressed her irritation, wishing not to be treated like a child. Meanwhile, the Grand Academy building stood majestically under the sun, its intricate architecture a testament to its long history. Inside, a different conversation unfolded as Zenon Kuan sat with his classmates, including John Kuan, who sighed in exasperation. They noted Leon Kuan's continued absence, and John Kuan shuddered at the thought of the incident that had left Leon Kuan potentially unable to have children, finding the prospect truly traumatic. John Kuan continued, admitting he had harbored similar doubts about Leon Kuan's judgment, ultimately concluding that he was an idiot for attempting to take away another person's slave. Zenon Kuan listened intently, sipping his drink. The narrative then shifted, reflecting on Leon Kuan's character, describing him as a hot-blooded protagonist whose sense of justice often ran rampant, leading him to act on impulse without considering the consequences. This internal reflection continued, contrasting the game's portrayal of Leon Kuan with the harsh realities of their world. While his actions, like trying to save an enslaved child, might seem bold and charming in a manga or anime, in reality, following one's convictions without being bound by rules made such a person incredibly troublesome to deal with. The thought process further emphasized that reality was far from the simple good versus evil dichotomy found in stories, possessing many shades of gray. To arbitrarily paint these complex areas black or white based on a hero's subjective whims was nothing short of an absolute nuisance. Zenon Kuan, now back in the present, concluded his internal monologue, musing that Leon Kuan was simply too earnest and clumsy. Sometimes, he thought, it was better to turn a blind eye and let things slide, as that was simply part of being a functioning member of society. Elsewhere at the table, Elisa, ever doting, offered more food to Ulzachan. John Kuan, still eating, conceded that while Leon Kuan might be an idiot, he didn't believe him to be a bad person at heart. As the meal concluded, Zenon Kuan observed the Oni girl, who was now happily stuffed amidst a pile of empty dishes, remarking on how much she had eaten. He then reflected on the larger conflict, expressing a shared sentiment that to defeat the Demon King, he hoped for a day when they could finally understand each other. He observed the Oni girl, who had become quite popular among the students, effortlessly charming them in the classroom. Her presence seemed to draw them in, a stark contrast to her earlier isolation. Moments later, as he walked down a sunlit hallway, the Oni girl skipped ahead of him, her small form a blur of motion, seemingly unburdened by the complexities he often pondered. His attention was then drawn to a scene outside the window, where a small group of students had gathered. Two male students were earnestly trying to persuade a blonde female student to join them. The male student with wavy blonde hair, Leon Kuan, confidently declared that they would be the front line and the blonde female student, Aerith Centria, would be the healer, promising she wouldn't regret joining their party. He even suggested a trial run for a single quest. Aerith, however, hesitated, finding the idea of joining a party with only guys a bit awkward. As he continued to observe, Zenon Kuan recognized the blonde student as Aerith Centria, the Saint of Centria, an excellent healer. He realized this was a pivotal party recruitment event, a classic scenario unfolding before his eyes. The Oni girl, beside him, bounced with curiosity, seemingly asking what he was looking at. He remembered seeing this exact situation before, a premonition of events to come. This was the critical flag event, where Aerith would join Leon Kuan's party. Suddenly, a hand reached out, interrupting the ongoing conversation. Leon Kuan, with a determined expression, declared that Centria had already decided to join his party. He then firmly took her hand, instructing her to come along. Aerith Centria, initially surprised, was then visibly impressed by Leon Kuan's courage and assertiveness. The narrative confirmed that, moved by his actions, she began to develop a faint affection for him, solidifying her role as a promising heroine. Zenon Kuan, still watching from the window, let out a soft gasp, marveling at the sight of a game event playing out right before his eyes. He found it quite moving to witness such a pivotal moment. The Oni girl continued to observe the unfolding drama with him. Suddenly, the Oni girl bumped into him from behind, startling him and causing him to exclaim in surprise. He was abruptly pulled from his thoughts as the Oni girl, Ulzachan, bumped into him, her small frame causing him to stumble. She looked up, asking him not to stop so suddenly, while he grimaced, a pained sound escaping his lips, perhaps still reeling from the previous events. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Aerith Centria's eyes widened with distress. A chilling realization dawned upon her. Leon Kuan, the one she had just joined, was absent today. A small, distant image of him sitting alone, looking dejected, underscored the gravity of the situation. As the news of Leon Kuan's absence spread, a palpable tension filled the air. Other students, including a male and female classmate, gathered around Aerith, expressing their alarm. They wondered aloud what would happen to the impending event, and, more urgently, if Aerith would be all right without the hero's presence. Zenon Kuan stood nearby, observing the unfolding crisis, the question of his own role now hanging heavy in the air. Outside the academy building, Aerith Centria stood with Leon and another male student. The light-haired student appeared to be making a proposition to Aerith. He explained that his father was a count, on very good terms with Aerith's father, Viscount Centria, and suggested they try to get along, even if just for once. Leon, observing from a distance, listened intently. Aerith, after a moment of consideration, acknowledged his words, stating that if it was only temporary, she would join him. The male student, pleased, declared they would head to the dungeon after school and begin the briefing. Aerith, however, seemed to harbor a hidden sadness, her eyes downcast. Meanwhile, Leon, still observing from inside, internally questioned the situation, wondering what he should do. He realized that Aerith was also a noble, and while he didn't think they were clearly targeting her, Their ulterior motives seemed plain as day. He lamented the twist of fate, with the heroine being taken away by a mere mob character. Elsewhere, other students gossiped about the unfolding events, finding it impossible to laugh at Leon's predicament. They noted that Aerith wouldn't become his party member at this rate, and that Leon was only going to fall further into ruin. Leon, overwhelmed by despair, collapsed to the floor, hoping this disaster wouldn't turn into something more troublesome. As the chaos unfolded, Zenon walked down a hallway, his hand running through his hair, a troubled expression on his face. Behind him, the small Oni girl followed silently. In a classroom, John, with his usual energetic demeanor, asked Elisa if she wanted to go to the Sage's playground during their free period, as he needed to practice. Elisa readily agreed, and other students were seen in the background, some sitting on the tiered benches, others standing and conversing. Zenon observed from a distance as Aerith Centria stood before male student 3 and Leon. Male student 3 spoke animatedly to Aerith, while Leon stood beside them, his expression a picture of utter despair, the weight of Aerith's decision clearly crushing him. Male student 3 continued to explain their plan, confidently stating that with Aerith, a healer, joining their party, clearing the Cave King's bedchamber would be a total breeze. Zenon, however, dismissed the dungeon as a beginner-friendly area, mainly inhabited by rock-type monsters like golems, and noted that while their recruitment method was pushy, it didn't break any rules. He internally scoffed at the situation, finding it annoying. Overwhelmed by annoyance, Zenon declared that there was no point in constantly worrying about the situation. He decided to head off to a dungeon himself, believing that just staying put was making him miserable and that some hunting would cheer him up. Moments later, Oni Girl 1, with an eager expression, looked up at him and asked where they were heading now. Zenon considered going to the Sage's training grounds, but Oni Girl 1, ever perceptive, questioned if he wasn't going to go after the girl from earlier. He quickly dismissed the idea, asking why on earth he would do that. She persisted, pointing out that he had a look on his face like he wanted to go after her, and directly asked if he was worried about Aerith. Zenon, caught off guard, stammered a partial admission, acknowledging that it might be true, but struggling to complete his thought. Oni Girl 1, observing his reaction, realized that even though he acted like he wasn't paying attention, he actually cared more than she thought. She warned him that if he was going to go after Aerith, they'd better hurry. Zenon, pulling her along, reiterated that he never said he was going after her, and besides, nothing was certain to happen. He continued his internal monologue, acknowledging that the other students' way of recruiting Aerith was pushy and hinted at their noble titles, which wasn't a classy move, but admitted that other students also engaged in that level of power harassment. He then dismissed the danger, reasoning that the difficulty level of the Cave King's bedchamber wasn't that high, and unless they had incredibly bad luck, they wouldn't need his help. Zenon firmly believed this was no place for him, Zenon the villain, to step in. He reasoned that the person who saves the main heroine had to be Leon. He couldn't be the one to save Aerith and end up triggering a flag that would turn him into some heroine-stealing protagonist. Meanwhile, Leon stood with a determined expression, seemingly ready to face whatever came next. Despite his outward denials and internal reasoning, Zenon's face remained troubled, a clear sign of his inner conflict. Oni Girl 1, noticing his expression, looked up at him with concern and asked why he was making such a troubled face. He found himself trapped in a profound internal conflict, yearning to save Aerith, yet feeling utterly incapable of making that choice. His heart wavered, a direct consequence of the trauma he carried from the game, Danbaru 2. In that world, Aerith's actions, influenced by Zenon's own role-playing, had led Leon, who once admired her as a hero, to resurrect the Demon King out of sheer hatred. He wished he could simply pretend he hadn't seen anything, convinced he was too deeply involved and had no right to interfere with Leon's path. Meanwhile, Oni Girl 1 observed him, acknowledging her own lack of understanding regarding her master's complex worries. Yet, a proverb from the Oni race echoed in her mind. If an Oni is troubled, they should just bite into it first. He questioned the meaning of such a blunt saying. She clarified that it meant to kill and devour one's enemies first, then worry about the details later. She urged him to stop overthinking, to simply beat his adversaries to death, and only then consider the aftermath. If he truly couldn't help but worry, she suggested, he should find someone and punch them. Zenon reacted with a mix of exasperation and amusement, labeling it an absolute muscle brain idea, incredibly dumb yet surprisingly refreshing. He burst into laughter, finding the battle-crazed race's motto ridiculous but effective in making worrying seem utterly pointless. He concluded that they were simply too stupid to overthink. He conceded that it wouldn't hurt to be an idiot once in a while, especially since Leon was already cooped up in bed. He decided there was no need to stress over scenarios and flags anymore, contemplating that perhaps he should follow Oni Girl 1 and Leon's example and simply act on his feelings for once. As he gently patted her head, she responded with an enthusiastic, "Yes, master." He resolved that even if his involvement had a negative impact, he would be the one to pay the price. He admitted he didn't know what kind of impact saving the heroine would have, but he was going to steal her away regardless. He rationalized that Leon's past misfortunes, getting kicked, missing the flag, taking a break from school, were all his own fault. Therefore, it was ridiculous for him to be racking his brains over this. With a newfound resolve, he and Oni Girl 1 strode confidently away from the Grand Academy building. He declared that no matter how things turned out, he would continue playing the role of the villain, saving whoever he wanted and crushing anyone he disliked. Oni Girl 1 cheered beside him, proclaiming, "Simple is best." He gave a decisive thumbs up, exclaiming, "Let's go." Oni, girl_1, beaming with excitement, affirmed, "Yes, that's Ulza's master." With that, they both leaped into the air, leaving the academy grounds behind in a blur of motion. Their journey led them through a quiet town, eventually arriving at the ominous entrance of a dark cave, where numerous glowing eyes hinted at the creatures lurking within. "Inside the cave," he announced, "Let's go." To which Oni girl_1 eagerly replied, "Yes, master." He identified their location as the Cave King's bedchamber. A menacing grin spread across his face as a formidable golem monster materialized before them, ready to engage. He watched as Oni girl_1, with a fierce determination, brought her spiked club down upon a golem, shattering its rocky form with a resounding impact. The creature cried out as it was utterly crushed. She moved with incredible speed and brutality, a whirlwind of destruction against the numerous rock-type monsters. Her internal thoughts echoed her actions, a desire to smash, slaughter, and kill them all, leaving them in smithereens. Her face beamed with pride as she declared her success to her master. He acknowledged her prowess, remarking that she had done great. He then reminded her that the dungeon was 10 floors deep, and the monsters would grow stronger as they descended, urging her to remain vigilant. He mused internally that her strength was precisely what he would expect from someone capable of beating Leon to a pulp. As they descended further into the Cave King's bedchamber, Xenon noted that they still hadn't caught up to Aerith and her party. He observed that Oni girl_1's weapons were particularly effective against the rock-type creatures inhabiting the dungeon, finding her methods quite brutal. Suddenly, a massive stone bear, its body composed of jagged rock and crystals, emerged from the shadows. Oni girl_1 gasped in surprise, recognizing the formidable foe, while Xenon calmly identified it as a stone bear, acknowledging its apparent strength. Without hesitation, Oni girl_1 launched herself at the stone bear, delivering a devastating blow that shattered parts of its rocky form. She roared for it to spill its guts. Xenon, with his sword raised and a magic spell ready, prepared to follow up, but the target was no longer in his immediate sight. Ulza-chan, with a fierce cry, delivered a powerful blow, shattering the defeated stone bear monster into fragments. Xenon-kun watched the aftermath, a slight concern in his expression. After the swift victory, Xenon-kun reflected that he had not experienced a true challenge since the gargoyle, barely getting a chance to warm up. Ulza-chan, meanwhile, beamed with pride, letting out a satisfied sigh. He then turned to Ulza-chan, his expression serious, and instructed her to stay back in the next fight until he gave the word, explaining that he could not allow her to put herself in danger. She reacted with a surprised gasp. He reiterated his command, stating it was an order with no objections allowed. Ulza-chan, looking dejected, could only offer a small, defeated sound in response. Suddenly, a new, larger stone bear monster emerged from the shadows, its form menacing. Xenon-kun's voice cut through the air, questioning if she truly believed him to be so weak that he couldn't handle things without her protection. As the monstrous creature lunged, Xenon-kun swiftly dodged its powerful attack, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He noted that its timing was perfect, just as he expected. The stone bear roared in frustration. He met the beast's next strike with his sword, parrying the blow with ease. His eyes gleamed with cunning as he declared that he still remembered its attack pattern. He carefully observed the stone bear, recognizing the specific motion it made just before its charging attack. As the monstrous creature lunged forward with a ferocious roar, he deftly stepped back, evading its powerful jaws. With a swift, acrobatic maneuver, he launched himself over the beast, striking it with such force that its rocky form shattered into countless fragments, its head crumbling into dust. He landed gracefully, his sword still extended, a fierce cry escaping his lips as the last remnants of the monster dissipated around him. With the threat neutralized, he calmly sheathed his blade, the debris of the defeated creature raining down harmlessly. Ulza-chan, who had been observing from behind a large rock, emerged with a relieved expression, praising him for his strength and declaring that he was truly fit to be her master. He turned to her, asking if she was alright. He mused internally that despite his low skill proficiencies, his knowledge of the game's mechanics allowed him to solo a mid-level monster without magic, confident that defeating stronger opponents would rapidly increase his abilities and allow him to clear the dungeon quickly. Ulza-chan, hearing his thoughts, remarked that his self-assessment sounded a bit sarcastic, though she didn't mind. Nonetheless, he cautioned her against overconfidence, reminding her that dangerous encounters were always a risk in the dungeon and that their current strength might not be enough to clear it just yet. As they continued deeper into the cavern, Ulza-chan held up a small, glowing orb, her eyes wide with excitement, while he examined a similar orb in his own hand. Their path led them into a vast and ancient cave system, its ceiling adorned with countless stalactites, revealing the entrance to the Cave King's bedchamber on the 8th floor. He observed the dim surroundings, noting the poor visibility within the dungeon. He instructed Ulza-chan to remain sharp, to which she eagerly responded, brandishing her spiked club and declaring her intent to slaughter any monster they encountered. Moments later, a sudden explosion of sound and debris erupted as Ulza-chan, true to her word, located a monster and attacked it with a powerful blow. He watched, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and slight alarm at her ferocity. The path ahead opened into a vast, cavernous chamber, its entrance jagged and dark, hinting at the unknown dangers within. As they approached, 3 panicked students, Leon Quinn, John, 1, and another male student, came scrambling out of the cave, shouting about a monster. He quickly pointed at them, demanding they stop. Despite his command, the students continued to flee. In response, he unleashed a powerful shadow bind spell, causing dark tendrils to erupt from the ground and ensnare the three, suspending them helplessly in the air amidst a cloud of dust and debris. With the students immobilized, he confronted John, 1, demanding to know why they were running and, more importantly, where Centria was. The trapped students, still panicked, explained that they had encountered an unexpectedly powerful monster and had no choice but to abandon Aerith and flee for their lives. He listened, his expression hardening with a dismissive TCH. The students pleaded with him to release them, but he coldly refused, declaring it was not his problem and dismissing them as morons. He then turned to Ulzachan, instructing her that they would continue onward. As he and Ulzachan walked away, he mused that he had already cleared most of the monsters in this particular area. He considered the fate of the bound students. If they were lucky, they would be safe until his binding magic wore off, but if unlucky, a monster would find them first. He continued to walk, dismissing the fates of those who would abandon their companions. However, his stride faltered as he noticed something ahead, his eyes widening in sudden surprise. A colossal, glittering creature, formed entirely of mithril, emerged from the depths, its powerful form radiating an ominous presence. It was a gigant mithril, a formidable foe. Meanwhile, Centria, now clad in a nun's habit, desperately tried to maintain a fragile barrier against the monster's assault, but it began to crack under the immense pressure. Xenon Kuin, witnessing the creature, recognized it as a dark blade, a particularly dangerous variant. He quickly instructed Ulzachan to buy them some time, emphasizing that she should focus on dodging and not overdo it. Ulzachan, ever obedient, immediately drew the monster's attention, crying out to it. Centria, injured and on the ground, looked up in surprise, recognizing Ulzachan as Baskerville-sama. Xenon Kuin turned to Centria, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. He noted that she hadn't changed at all from the game, as she continued to plead with him to run away, insisting he could not take on the monster. Her unwavering belief was that her very existence was meant for self-sacrifice and devotion to others, always attempting to help those in trouble, even if it meant risking her own life. Centria continued to urge him to leave her behind, convinced that her sacrifice would allow him and Ulzachan to escape. Xenon Kuin, however, approached her, asking if she was all right, his concern evident despite her stubbornness. He then forced a drink into her mouth, ignoring her protests. She thanked him weakly, but still insisted he run, promising to buy him some time. Xenon Kuin, however, was clearly annoyed by her persistent self-sacrificing attitude. His internal thoughts raged. Her stubbornness was beginning to truly infuriate him. He resolved to give this stupid woman a piece of his mind. Xenon Kuin erupted, shouting at her, calling her an idiot and questioning who would listen to her pleas. He declared that he would definitely make her say, "Please save me," to truly save Aerith, in the way she truly meant it. As the monstrous golem continued its assault, Aerith, tears streaming down her face, pleaded with Xenon, insisting that at this rate, both he and the Oni girl would perish. She begged them not to sacrifice themselves for someone like her. Xenon, clenching his fist in frustration, sharply questioned her words, demanding to know what she meant by someone like me. Aerith looked down, unable to articulate a full response, only managing a hesitant sound. Xenon, his voice rising, declared that her self-esteem was far too low, making it sound as though she believed her own life held no value whatsoever. The true reason behind Aerith's profound self-sacrificial nature lay in a traumatic event from her childhood. When she was a young girl, she and her mother were ambushed by a group of ruthless bandits. To shield her daughter from harm, Aerith's mother bravely erected a magical barrier. However, maintaining such powerful barrier magic demanded a constant and heavy toll on her mana reserves, draining her strength over time. Despite the immense strain, Aerith's mother grimaced, pushing through the pain. She vowed that even if it cost her own life, she would not allow the barrier to fall, knowing that if it did, Aerith would surely be killed by the attacking bandits. Her resolve, however, could not defy the limits of her body. Aerith's mother collapsed, her life force draining away as the barrier flickered. Just then, the bandits, startled by the sudden arrival of guards, shouted orders to prevent anyone from escaping before deciding to flee themselves. Young Aerith cried out desperately for her mother, but it was too late. Having survived at the cost of her mother's life, Aerith began to view her own existence as trivial, becoming someone who would readily sacrifice herself for the sake of others. Xenon, witnessing her current self-deprecating attitude, internally raged against such self-sacrifice, hating the idea of someone throwing away their life when a chance for happiness was right before them. He continued his relentless confrontation, demanding that Aerith stop making light of herself. She attempted to justify her actions, claiming a duty to serve as a servant of God, but he found her reasoning irritating. He reminded her of her father and mother, who had died for her sake, asserting that by denying her own worth, she was rejecting every person who truly cared about her. He questioned why she couldn't grasp this fundamental truth. He then reflected internally that these harsh words were originally meant for Leon, but since Leon was absent, he had no choice but to deliver them himself. Aerith, overwhelmed, could only manage a soft gasp, her face contorted in distress. Meanwhile, in a flash of memory or a powerful internal resolve, Xenon declared his unwavering intent to smash every depressing development. He vowed not to allow the heroine to die to save someone else, nor would he permit her to be unhappy, now that he had been reincarnated into this world. For her sake, he would become a hero or a villain, whatever it took. His lecture continued, growing even more intense. He accused her of pure arrogance, calling her a loser who couldn't even make herself happy, yet presumed to make others happy. He vehemently stated that her life was hers and hers alone, and there was no such thing as a life worth wasting for the sake of others. He commanded her not to be so conceited. He pressed on, telling her that a weakling should act like a weakling, clinging to someone, crying ugly, and begging them to be saved. He reminded her that she had things she wanted to do, hobbies she enjoyed, and urged her to say it if she didn't want to die. In the background, a golem continued to be assailed by unseen forces. Aerith, her eyes welling with tears, finally began to speak, her voice trembling. She questioned if it was truly acceptable for someone like her, who had survived at the cost of her mother's life, to ask for help. He leaned in close, his expression firm, and called her a moron. He explained that asking for help was the privilege of the weak, and since she was weaker than him, she should hurry up, lower her head, and beg him to save her. With tears streaming down her face, Aerith clasped her hands together in a desperate plea, begging him to save her. He watched her, a slight smirk playing on his lips, noting how enviable it was that she looked so pretty even when crying, and wondered if he should share some of that beauty. He quickly dismissed the thought, feeling as though a troublesome flag had just been triggered, and resolved not to let it affect him. Turning his attention to the massive golem, which remained unscratched despite everyone else's attacks, he instructed Aerith to drink a mana potion, assuring her it would restore her mana. He declared she had no right to refuse, and that he would take down the formidable monster. He then asserted that she shouldn't lump him in with those who run away and abandon a woman, as he had a proper plan. He watched as Ulza struggled, her face contorted in pain, as a massive, spiky weapon struck her. Even the Oni's club, a formidable weapon, seemed to inflict no damage against the formidable foe. The creature, a gigant mithril, displayed an incredible toughness, just as he remembered from the game. It was not a monster one would normally encounter, a truly rare specimen. In Yandere, a dangerous belief persisted, that no such thing as a safe dungeon existed. No matter how familiar a dungeon might seem, no place was ever 100% secure. Unforeseen circumstances could always arise, as such settings were deliberately built into the game. These dangerous encounter monsters possessed power clearly higher than the dungeon's typical level, appearing with a mere 0.1% probability. Furthermore, each one possessed skills that would guarantee annihilation the moment it was encountered. Xenon, understanding the gravity of the situation, turned to the nun and instructed her to heal Ulza, the demi-human nearby, while he prepared to begin a magic incantation. The nun, however, expressed concern, believing that magic would be ineffective against such a monster. He scoffed at her doubt, asserting his deep knowledge of these rare, dangerous species of monsters whose bodies were covered in mithril ore. A single drop of blood on his blade confirmed his understanding of its unique properties. He explained that mithril possessed a strong resistance to magic, causing attacks to simply bounce off without inflicting any damage whatsoever. He then firmly commanded her to simply follow his lead and perform the task she was assigned. Despite her initial reservations, the nun complied, kneeling and beginning her incantation. She called forth powerful buffs: X-Heal, Strength Up, Stamina Charge, and Rabbit's Foot, the magical energy swirling around her staff. Moments later, Ulza felt a sudden, invigorating surge of power course through her. Her wounds visibly healed, and she declared with renewed vigor that she could still fight. Xenon then addressed the kneeling nun, telling her that her true strength lay in healing and support, not in attempting to be a shield for others. He questioned why she would negate her own inherent abilities. Still, the nun, looking distressed, responded that even so, she did not wish to see anyone get hurt. Xenon, addressing the nun's protective instincts, calmly explained that standing at the front to protect is the vanguard's duty, while a healer's sole job is to mend those who are hurt. He then surveyed the massive golem, acknowledging the futility of the situation. Both physical and magical attacks were having almost no effect, making this death-on encounter truly insane. With a determined glint in his eye, he declared it was time to proceed. Xenon reflected on the game's mechanics, recalling countless times he had been frustrated by his low skill proficiencies. He understood that the system, Yandere, didn't rely on levels, but on skill proficiency. To acquire new magic, one needed to obtain magic tomes, learn the spells from them, and then diligently grind their proficiency until they were capable of activating the magic. He was about to use a spell he shouldn't be able to cast at his current level. He continued his internal monologue, noting that even with low proficiencies, one could learn powerful spells from magic tomes, though they wouldn't activate without sufficient skill. It was precisely this troublesome system that had captivated him. With a confident smirk, he asked if they should begin, revealing that there were two distinct ways to defeat the gigant mithril. The first method, he explained, involved brute physical force. One would need to continuously dodge the enemy's attacks and relentlessly deal damage until its durability was completely depleted. Around the massive, inert golem, the unconscious forms of the other students lay scattered. The alternative, Xenon revealed, was through magic attacks. He asserted that the common belief of mithril nullifying magic was false. Once the mithril armor sustained magical damage beyond a certain threshold, it would be destroyed, transforming the formidable foe into a mere regular golem. With a determined expression, Xenon produced a small, dark bottle. This vital information, he mused, was hard-won, shared on walkthrough sites by the many players who had braved the challenge. It was a pay-to-win item, a doping bottle. As Ulza and the nun watched with wide, surprised eyes, Xenon explained that the doping bottle allowed him to temporarily increase his skill proficiencies. He then activated the item, and a swirling vortex of dark energy erupted from his hand, signaling skill max. Now empowered, Xenon commanded Ulza to get back. He declared that he could now command spells at the highest tier of dark magic. As a colossal, swirling magical construct began to form before him. With a powerful surge, Xenon unleashed the spell known as Abyss Gate, proclaiming that only the Demon King and he possessed the ability to use such a formidable incantation. The golem stood, awaiting the devastating impact of the dark magic. The gigant mithril golem, caught in the terrifying embrace of Abyss Gate, let out a guttural scream as the dark magic tore at its form, radiating immense power. Its mithril armor, once thought impenetrable, began to crack and shatter, pieces flaking away as the destructive energy consumed it from within, revealing the void beneath. The golem's massive body disintegrated into a swirling vortex of dark particles, leaving nothing but shimmering dust in its wake, a testament to the spell's overwhelming power. With the threat vanquished, Xenon exhaled a weary phew, all taken care of escaping his lips, his hand trembling slightly from the exertion. Ulza, however, bounced with unbridled joy, exclaiming, "We did it, as expected of my master." Meanwhile, Aerith watched Xenon, a profound realization dawning upon her. She mused internally, wondering if he was indeed the fated person her mother had spoken of, the one to whom she should devote everything. Ulza, still ecstatic, launched herself at Xenon, clinging to him tightly. He winced, telling her to stop, explaining that his entire body ached from the rebound effects of the doping bottle. Aerith observed their interaction, a blush creeping onto her cheeks. She tried to speak, a soft no, escaping her lips, but her words trailed off as she looked at Xenon, who was now sitting, clearly in discomfort from the lingering pain. A desolate, cavernous space stretched before them, its jagged walls and floor littered with debris and discarded items, suggesting either a natural formation or the aftermath of a fierce struggle. Within this world, the Witch of the Watery Depths held the power to exchange collected metals for special items. Xenon, holding one such metal, mused that this system was likely akin to a game mechanic, with the metal itself serving as proof of clearing a dangerous encounter. As they continued their journey through the cavern, Xenon suggested it was time to head back. The demon girl walked silently beside him, their footsteps echoing softly against the cavern walls. Suddenly, a powerful whirlwind erupted, trapping two students within its chaotic vortex. Xenon, Sister Lily, and the demon girl observed the scene, Xenon uttering a surprised exclamation as the students cried out the name Baskerville. The students, caught in the swirling winds, desperately pleaded for Baskerville to release them and undo the spell, complaining of the pain. Xenon, observing them, wondered if no monsters had pursued them, concluding he should simply leave them to their fate. Sister Lily, however, intervened, explaining that she had volunteered to be a decoy, which was the reason the students had separated from them. She asserted that blaming them now would be illogical. Xenon, momentarily distracted, wondered if she had just called him by his first name. Sister Lily continued, arguing that punishing the students was the Academy's responsibility, and a student's personal ethical viewpoint was no excuse for vigilante justice. Xenon, with a stern expression, acknowledged her point but insisted that the fact remained they had abandoned a party member. She implored him to stop lowering his own reputation any further, adding that there was no need for him to dirty his hands dealing with such individuals. Sister Lily's impassioned plea resonated with Xenon. He considered the severe repercussions of abandoning the trapped students, realizing he would be condemned by the entire academy, and even his newfound friends might forsake him. He acknowledged that while the students brought this predicament upon themselves, leaving them as monster bait was an unacceptable outcome. As he pondered, the whirlwind intensified, causing the trapped students to cry out in terror. Xenon, with a snap of his fingers, dismissed the notion of being a saintess, as Sister Lily had implied. Yet he conceded that showing mercy to such hopeless people was indeed her nature. Meanwhile, a different demon girl, Ulza, full of playful energy, admired her striped satchel. She then declared her boredom and her intention to smash some enemies, eager for action. Back with Xenon and Sister Lily, he finally relented, agreeing to her plea with a casual wave of his hand. Sister Lily, her face flushed, clarified her motives to Xenon. She insisted her desire was not to save the students themselves, but to protect the honor of Xenon, her savior. Ulza, nearby, continued to hum with excitement, seemingly oblivious to the nuanced conversation. A moment of quiet understanding passed between Sister Lily and Xenon as they stood facing each other in the cavern. Elsewhere, Ulza, with a cheerful was already diligently collecting various items and crystals from the ground, having apparently defeated a large, monstrous creature whose remains lay nearby. Xenon, observing Ulza's actions, remarked on her cheeky response to his earlier command, questioning when she had become his protector. Sister Lily watched him with a concerned expression. He then called out to Ulza, instructing her to return. Ulza, with a resounding, "Yes, master," turned and began to run back towards Xenon and Sister Lily. Upon her return, Ulza proudly presented her satchel, brimming with collected crystals and items, exclaiming to Xenon that she had gathered lots of items. Having completed her task, Ulza beams with happiness as Xenon pats her head, commending her efforts. Sister Lily observes the interaction with a gentle smile. The group then begins their ascent back up the dark, stone-hewn path, leaving the depths of the dungeon behind. As they walk, Ulza clings tightly to Xenon's arm, her face pressed against him, while Sister Lily walks closely beside them. Sister Lily, too, draws close to Xenon, pressing her body against his side, causing him a moment of palpable discomfort. Xenon's face contorts in a silent scream of internal panic, overwhelmed by the unexpected and intense proximity. He internally protests, acutely aware of the soft pressure of Sister Lily's chest against his arm, and attempts to politely suggest she maintain a bit more distance while they walk. Sister Lily, however, counters his suggestion, explaining that as a healer, she will be in trouble if not protected when the time comes, and thus keeping close is logical. She then reminds him that he himself told her to do as she pleased, leaving Xenon to internally lament the potential for being wrongly accused of molestation. Xenon, still reeling from the situation, realizes that Sister Lily is holding him responsible for his own words, claiming she is simply doing as he instructed. He internally grapples with the implications, recognizing that the flags for a romantic development have been fully raised, and despite her not being in a formal party, he has inadvertently snatched her away. Sister Lily then shifts the topic, asking Xenon if she could speak with him. She recounts her mother's dying words, who instructed her to find her fated partner, devote everything to him, and stay by his side, for that person would surely be her hero. She then wonders if Xenon is that hero her mother spoke of. Xenon, utterly flustered by her words, internally exclaims that he is no hero and that Aerith's mother's final thoughts were a massive misunderstanding, desperately wishing to clarify that he is supposed to be the enemy. The Witch of the Watery Depths continued her cryptic counsel, observing him. She understood that whether he became a hero or a villain was entirely his own will, suggesting that perhaps he would end up a hero from this point forward. Yet, her words also carried a chilling warning. Who hunts down the hero and leads the world to ruin? He, however, was far too flustered by Sister Lily's proximity and declarations to fully process the witch's profound advice. He questioned her, asking when she had become a fortune teller, and stated he hadn't asked for life advice. As he spoke, her hand gently touched his arm, her gaze unwavering and filled with an intense devotion that made his heart pound. Her grip tightened slightly, and he internally panicked, overwhelmed by the unexpected intensity of her feelings. She continued her heartfelt vows, declaring him the one she served, her person of destiny. She promised that if he became a hero, she would become a saintess or even a guardian angel to protect him. Conversely, if he were to live out his days as an ordinary man, she would devote her life to him as an ordinary woman, swearing to remain by his side in sickness and in health, forever unchanged. These fervent declarations were entirely new to him, lines that had never appeared in the game he knew. He felt his face flush, his mind racing, and he desperately tried to calm himself, reminding himself not to focus on her chest, as both Sister Lily and Ulza clung to him. His internal struggle intensified, sweat beading on his brow as he realized this unexpected development was far too much for him to handle. Moments later, as they continued their journey through the dark, winding cavern, Ulza began to rub her eyes, declaring herself sleepy. Xenon, seeing her fatigue, offered to carry her on his back. He hoisted her onto his shoulders, but the added weight made walking difficult. Sister Lily, ever supportive, immediately offered to help him, promising to support him so he wouldn't have to worry. Together, they pressed on, finally reaching a long staircase leading upwards towards a brilliant light, signaling the successful clearing of another dungeon. He emerged from the dungeon, the bright light of the exit momentarily blinding. A small, sleepy voice from his back murmured about hunger. Still carrying the drowsy girl on his shoulders, he walked alongside Sister Lily, who smiled gently at their progress. His resolve hardened. He would never become a character to be betrayed or used. He would defy the scenario. He vowed to move forward in his own way, ensuring the world would not collapse under his watch. He smiled, a confident glint in his eyes, reflecting on his journey. Ulza was here, and he had even made friends. And there was one more person. This new companion was Aerith Centria, one of the three main heroines, now by his side. As the morning light broke over the city, birds soared through the sky, signaling a new day. The grand gates of a stately building stood open, guarded by two silent figures. He continued his journey, Ulza clinging to his leg, and Sister Lily walking beside him, embracing his path after being reincarnated as the villain. The vast city square stretched before them, a testament to the world he was shaping. His path, as the villain, was only just beginning.